Chapter 309. Archmage Sandro is ranked second out of the 4 vice leaders of the Sword of Order. On the surface, he's a master of wind magic, but he's actually the boss of the ghosts behind the scenes. He's a peak myth-ranked undead mage. Although he didn't receive the emblem of truth for undead magic, that's probably only because he didn't come up with any theories. After all, nobody in the Cloud Tower is more qualified than him to receive the emblem of truth. Also, he's also my junior, Heloise. You've really taught so many excellent disciples. No, I met him before you. No matter what, he's still your senior. The silly cat before me was still pretending to be natural. However, as a core member of the Sword of Order, she had personally experienced searching for outstanding new blood for the Sword of Order. From a certain standpoint, she was an elder of the Sword of Order who was even more experienced than Sandro. How's your relationship with the Sword of Order's leader who never shows his face? You already said that he never shows his face, so how could we have a relationship? Don't even talk about how secretive Black Eye is. Ever since my identity was exposed, it's likely that all my disciples are under surveillance. That old bastard is probably afraid that I'll steal his power. Otherwise, he wouldn't have forced me to leave back then. What does the identity of an undead mean to us? He's just finding an excuse to chase me away. It means that if nothing unexpected happens, you'll never be able to surpass the semigod rank of Black Eye. Can't you say something nicer? Right, hurry up and improve your personal power level. It's so uncomfortable that a magical pet can't surpass its master's contract. I also want to experience the semigod rank of the undead. As long as I recover my power level, how could I, all-knowing Heloise, be any weaker than you brats? The silly cat seemed to become angry from embarrassment as she said this. Even if the requirement for non-undead creatures to grow up will be lowered, are you really that confident in breaking through the triple door? Of course. I had already reached the threshold, but I didn't even have a physical body. How could I possibly break through the barrier of body and soul fusion? I finally found a suitable physical body, a high elf body with the blood of an ancient god, but I didn't even get to use it for a single day before you and that Adam dismembered me. The more I think about it, the angrier I get. I want to bite you. Damn it, you already bit me, so why are you still talking? Don't move. Let me take a few more bites to vent my anger. I felt rather helpless as I watched the silly cat bite me from my chest all the way to my neck, and then to my face. I wanted to laugh, but I knew that if I laughed, Heloise would really become angry out of embarrassment. Since when did the immortal king of resentment really become a house cat that knew how to act like a spoiled child? Did it start from the day we signed the magical pet contract, when we inexplicably got used to each other's existence? Perhaps it was the day Rose died, and her journey of vengeance really came to an end. At least in her heart, there was something other than resentment, and she did not close her heart in her own world again. Perhaps it was the day they were destined to reach the end together. In a sense, the magic pet contract was indeed outrageous. It forcefully bound 2 different souls together. Perhaps it was from the day he decided to open his heart to her lonely self at all times. Soul communication was much more effective than any language. The lonelier one's heart was, the more they longed for communication. Perhaps it was from the day she unknowingly got used to the other's body temperature. Perhaps it was from the day she got used to saying good morning to the other every day. Perhaps it was from the day she started treating the other less and less like an outsider. Alright then, let's not think too much about it. Judging from how her soft and numbing bites suddenly turned into painful bites, the silly cat had become Tsundere again. Hey, don't go too overboard. We still have to meet people later. What if my face is scratched? People will think that my grape trellis collapsed. I'll just tell you the truth. You can just say that your cat scratched my face. Is that any different from a grape trellis? That's just a common excuse you use when a woman scratches your face. You're intentionally trying to make me lose face. Alright then, when the peak-level Archmage's carriage stopped in front of us, Sandro was stunned as he looked at me, who was still trying my best to pull off the silly cat that was biting my head and refusing to come down. Second senior brother, I'll talk to you in detail after I subdue Master. P2E. You can't defeat me, so you're asking for an outsider's help. Useless man. What happened next completely destroyed the image of the mysterious dark mage that I had worked so hard to build. Who would be able to respect a guy who rolled on the ground and fought with his pet cat for more than half an hour, only to lose when his face was full of claws and teeth marks? Image. We're archmages who symbolize knowledge and wisdom. Can't you have some sense of shame? P2E, sense of shame? Is that even edible? Ever since I started following you, I've done all kinds of cosplay. How could I possibly have any image left? You've always forced me to change into this and that. Do you really like pet cosplay so much? Now that you're someone important, you're going to put on your pants and refuse to acknowledge your mistakes? I'm telling you, don't even think about it. Don't intentionally make it sound so ambiguous. Look at second senior brother, he's so cold when he looks at me. It's like he's looking at Bayfoam. My reputation. Actually, there are quite a few demon warlocks who have affairs with their succubi. I'm not biased against them. Although Archmage Roland's interests are a little unique, that's still personal freedom. Yep, I can understand. Alright then, I repeatedly emphasized that I could understand. That slight retreat was actually a perfect last hit. But fortunately, Heloise always remembered that this was the time to get down to business. Roland, I say, forget about your reputation. It's already hopeless. Sandro, long time no see. It's been almost 200 years. By the way, can't you just change your name to something cooler? That's basically a textbook undead mage name. This soul fluctuation? Heloise. Teacher Heloise. Alright then, the all-knowing one's appearance helped me redeem some of my reputation. With this demon professor acting as a bridge between me and my fellow apprentices, many things could be directly discussed. Do you want to become the leader of the Sword of Order? Do you want the Sword of Order to become a holy land for unrestrained heretic mags? This was the first sentence I said to Sandro. It was also the core of our conversation. We had spent quite a bit of time plotting against each other, but we had both obtained quite a bit. Andrew was even more hurried than when he had first arrived, and he seemed to be sincerely welcoming me. It would seem that both of us had obtained unexpected benefits. Is it possible to succeed? However, I wasn't as confident as I had been when I convinced Andrew. After all, nobody would be certain that they could win against an old mage who had been in charge of a top-level magic guild for 300 or 400 years. It's basically impossible with just him. He's far too stupid. Out of all my disciples, he's probably in the bottom 3 in terms of intelligence. I suddenly felt pity for this bald old mage. Just now, he had been having such a great time talking to me, acting as if he was a teacher and his disciple. Heloise had even repeatedly said the future leader of the Sword of Order and my most trusted disciple several times, making him quite happy. How can someone so stupid become the vice leader of the Sword of Order? That's because all those who aren't stupid have been killed by Black Eye. Otherwise, the Sword of Order wouldn't have been suppressed by the other top-level magic guilds even though there are so many heretical mags in the Sword of Order. Then why did you say that you trust him the most? Heh, of course he's my most trusted disciple. That's because all my other disciples are far too sly and untrustworthy. Especially a certain someone. It's already good enough if he doesn't betray me. The silly cat even glanced at me as she said this. It was obvious that she was implying something, but I simply looked up at the sky and pretended not to understand. In that case, we can't count on him anymore. Only by convincing him to become a traitor and attract Black Eye's attention will we have a chance at success. So, you have other plans as well? Yep. More than 70% of the Sword of Order's members are heretical mags. They're quite different from other mage guilds. Their resources and research funds are distributed in a jungle style. Many mags are also passionate about power and authority. They're a force that can be used. I really wanted to take control of this organization back in the day. That's why you were chased away by Black Eye, but nobody knows just how many disciples or confidants I had back in the day. Nobody knows just how many of them reached the peak like Sandro. Actually, there was also a vice leader who worked for me. She was far smarter than Sandro. From a certain standpoint, Demon Professor Heloise wasn't even on the calamity rankings because of her own personal danger. Apart from her revenge against the elven gods, she was basically harmless. The most dangerous part about her was that she often taught forbidden and dark knowledge to geniuses who strayed from the right path. Perhaps it wouldn't be noticeable in a short period of time, but it was just like how an old farmer would casually scatter seeds into the fertile soil. Perhaps the seeds would spend most of their time sleeping there, but there would always be a few dangerous seeds that would accidentally sprout. That would be a huge problem. Back in the day, Amelia was like this. I was also like this. Sometimes, I would ask myself if my life would have taken a completely different direction if I hadn't met Sandro in this city, if I hadn't come into contact with that forbidden knowledge, if I hadn't met Yongye. No, I know my own personality better than anyone else. Personality determines fate. The me back in the day was unable to let go. Even if I hadn't met Heloise, perhaps the process would have been different, but the result would probably be the same. I wasn't an idiot who would blame others for my own mistakes. I shook my head and cast aside all these unnecessary emotions. Right now, the most important thing was the present. In order to influence the final conclusion of the Truth Symposium, I would indeed need the full support of several major organizations. So, does that mean that it's highly likely that we'll be able to obtain control over the Sword of Order? No. Black Eye has already controlled this organization for several hundred years. I feel that no matter how I plan, the success rate won't be more than 30%. But as long as we prove that we have the confidence to split the Sword of Order apart, Black Eye will definitely come to a compromise with us. We don't ask for much anyway, so he should be able to accept it. The silly cat jumped onto my shoulder and smiled proudly. She seemed to have seen through my goal. Ha, indeed. We won't lose anything regardless of whether we succeed or not. The worst result is that he only needs to support me in this Truth Symposium. Actually, I thought that you would oppose my plan. Heloise was actually hesitating. Why would you think that? Your suggestion helped increase the success rate of my plan. In fact, I'm quite grateful to you. After all, back in Sulphur Mountain City, you created that set of laws and legal procedures that repeatedly emphasized the process of judgment and procedural justice. I thought that you cared more about the correct process than the correct result. Overthrowing another mage organization and causing internal strife in an otherwise harmonious mage organization isn't correct at all. No, it's actually the opposite. Of course I care about the process. That's because the rules are to be placed under the sun to give people confidence and a sense of safety. But sometimes, I need to make a choice. If it's impossible for both sides to take care of each other, then it's enough as long as the result is good. As for myself, I'm just an evil person. I wasn't lying at all. It was impossible for me to lie due to our soul connection. Back when I was in Sulphur Mountain City, my personal prison was filled with evil bastards who couldn't be judged but had committed terrible crimes. Even if I couldn't satisfy the requirements of procedural justice, I could accept it as long as the result was just. But I also knew that I was actually no different from those evil bastards who did whatever they wanted. I was still an evil person who pursued self-satisfaction. It seemed that the silly cat was quite satisfied with my answer. For the sake of our own goals, we caused others to bleed and even die. As long as our own goals were achieved, we didn't care about anyone else's death. We truly are evil partners. Of course, there's no difference between us. No matter what the reason was, some things have already been done. In the end, I'm just an evil person. I've never denied this. Then, my fellow evil person, when will you give me my freedom and release me from prison? I'm truly sorry. Through this incident, I've once again confirmed that you're far too dangerous. For the sake of the world, your punishment will still be life imprisonment with no possibility of bail. That's really too much. Well, since there's no other way, I'll have to ask for your guidance in the future. Comrade Prison Guard. I suddenly understand Adam and the others' helplessness a little. Actually, I think it's more appropriate to call us prison mates. At the very least, I've also locked myself in prison. Is there a difference? I think there's still a slight difference. At the very least, prison mates have similar food and treatment, and prison guards can find opportunities to take care of prisoners they don't like. They can even deduct the prisoner's treatment to play with them. They can even give the prisoner a day off. I suddenly feel like being a prison guard is better. Can I change that? Don't even think about it. I'm destined to be an evil person forever. Since you're a man, it's a promise. A human and a cat chatted and laughed together in a haunted and desolate mountain. They talked about schemes that were destined to cause a calamity. It was as if they were talking about something interesting in a ghost story. But only they knew that this was probably the happiest time they had ever had. Chapter 3:10. High up in the mountains, golden battle flags of light fluttered in the wind. Below the flags was an orderly military formation. At the very front were noble knights. Their adamantine armor reflected a dazzling golden light under the sunlight. Their steeds, shields, and swords were all equipped with their weapons with the help of their attendants. They were now ready to charge. But judging from their uneven armor, it was obvious that they weren't from the same country. Yet, they were fighting under the same flag. At this moment, the horn for charge hadn't been blown yet. The knights tightened their reins to prevent their impulsive horses from messing up their formation. Behind the knights were heavily armored dragon gunners. Guards with tower shields were patrolling the area. Archers and catapults were anxiously calculating the trajectory of the arrows. At the very back of the army, priests were singing holy songs. The air was filled with the fragrance of holy water. There were even several important figures wearing red cardinal robes among them. Although the cardinals were obviously the highest-ranking members of the army, the Holy Light's battle flag wasn't only composed of Holy Light warriors. There were also the crescent flag, the golden snake emblem, the three-headed dog emblem, and countless other famous and unknown emblems and flags. The Holy Church had summoned countless devout believers, local domain lords, and even ordinary farmers who were fighting for the Holy Light would raise their wooden spears and participate in this battle. Facing off against them were no easy opponents. This was the Holy Light's border defense army. Perhaps they weren't as well equipped or well prepared as the Holy Lights, and they didn't even have 1/10 of the Holy Light's numbers, but they absolutely had a reason to not retreat. This was their home. They were the Holy Light's East Erkenfeld's 1st military squadron, which was responsible for defending this place. They were also the soldiers of Erkenfeld City, which was located several hundred kilometers away. A holy war? No, it's just another ordinary battle where everyone hates each other and wants to kill each other. They were already surrounded by the Holy Light's ambush. It would be impossible for them to outrun these knights on flat plains. Even though they were facing an army 10 times their size, perhaps their feet were instinctively trembling, but their hearts were as resolute as a boulder. Perhaps their arms holding shields weren't steady enough, and some rookies even dropped their weapons, but not a single one of them retreated. Everyone, prepare for the charge. The order to do battle had been passed down for quite some time now. Every Bardi Empire's border guard was waiting for their own deaths as they faced an undefeatable army. Finally, the silver-haired general of the invaders completed his final preparations. The Holy Knight Marshal, who wore golden lion-patterned armor, rode back and forth in front of the enemy formation, his eagle-like gaze searching for any weaknesses in the enemy formation. However, he still didn't see any signs of the enemy collapsing or wavering. Finally, he gave up on the extravagant hope of winning without a fight. He also made the mental preparation to pay an equivalent amount of sacrifice. His eyes were still sharp, but his wrinkled face changed in an instant. He first nodded in agreement with his opponent, but then he shook his head as if it was a pity that the warriors of both sides were about to die. He made up his mind to end the battle quickly, so he unsheathed the military sword that represented Zhong Qi. It was stimulated by the holy light and flashed with golden splendor under the sunlight. Wah! When the commander's sword, which was embedded with a blue teardrop stone, landed, an ancient beast horn sounded, and the holy priests finished their final mass. The participating warriors' golden swords were filled with water droplets condensed from holy water. They had all sorts of different equipment to begin with, and the various buff divine arts on them made them seem rather laughable. However, in the eyes of their enemies, these buff divine arts were powerful tools that would greatly increase their combat strength. The mixed battle formation had always been rather noisy. But now that they truly began to move, the sound of horse hooves, footsteps, and battle roars all mixed together, finally creating an earth-shaking rumble. The gigantic army slowly slid down like a landslide, pressing down on the enemy formation at the foot of the mountain. For the holy light. All the shouting combined into a single phrase. The name of holy light once again rang out in this holy war. But this time, both sides were still humans of the same species. Bardi. Long live victory. Bardi's royal spear and divine scepter clashed in midair. When the landslide and the boulder collided, time seemed to freeze at this moment. Tower shields with cross tattoos viciously smashed into battle hammers with dragon heads. Golden spears nailed the crossbowmen who had been stirring their bowstrings to the ground. Catapults thundered in unison as they used their own methods to whip the ground. Bardi's warriors weren't foolhardy enough to send themselves to their deaths. They had done their homework for the night vanguard, which was the most difficult to deal with. The knight's charge was stopped by pits and horse-tripping ropes. The 10-meter-long super dragon spear formation harvested the lives of the venerable knights. However, there was far too much of a difference in numbers between the two sides. It was just like how a small flame would be unable to dry up a river. Once these obstacles were filled up by corpses, the difference in quality and quantity made the Bardi First Army a target to be harvested. Screams and howls of pain could be heard everywhere. Not even 5 minutes had passed since the battle began, and the balance of the battle had already been lost. It was now a massacre of the many against the few. The flesh grinders were harvesting lives. No one dared to close their eyes and scream. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, as if the gods were unwilling to witness such a tragedy. Honor, glory, courage, blessing of the holy light. Such things didn't exist on a battlefield like this. All the warriors needed to do was stab their swords into their enemy's chest before they died. Pity, justice, friendship. Under the dark clouds and on the stage, the sword dancers only had two choices: kill their enemy, or be killed by their enemy. The tremendous difference in numbers allowed the bloody battle to end very quickly. However, the ambush battle without any captives turned the battlefield into a sea of blood and corpses. And, the legendary veteran General Gordon, who was known as Biso's Eagle, didn't seem like a victor at all. The entire Bardi army was annihilated, yet they still fought to the death. They forcefully caused more than double the number of casualties. Is this the mega empire Bardi? Actively invading such a country? This type of battle won't be easy to fight. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to indicate that this battle wasn't going to end well. Even the veteran General Gordon, who was ranked 7th on the Holy Light rankings and was nominally the highest commander of the Allied Holy Light armies, no longer had any confidence in victory against the human mega empire Bardi. However, there was no turning back. Gordon's commanding sword was already pointed at the next target. Aachenfeld City. That city is now empty. It'll be our first victory. The Bardi Empire is voluntarily negotiating for peace. How is that possible? If I was facing Marguerite, who had an icy expression on her face, I probably wouldn't have exclaimed in surprise. Instead, I would have directly called her nonsense. I was currently in a coffee shop attached to Thorn Garden. Apart from me, Heloise, and Marguerite, there was only Adam, who was currently playing poker with himself. It was evident that he was incredibly bored. As for why Marguerite seemed to be in a bad mood, it seemed that I was the one who caused it. Of course, I could understand why Marguerite was in a bad mood. After all, they still didn't have much free time to spend alone time together after completing their mission. Every time they went out by themselves, I would always drag them back to the Cloud Tower. This time, in order to better control the situation at the Cloud Tower, I had to summon them back. I really wasn't doing this on purpose. After all, there were some things that only she would be able to deal with. Setting aside Adam, who was an extra, for now, even though Marguerite was a rogue mage, she was a heroic mage during the battle against Yongye. The calm and elegant Marguerite had quite a high reputation in the Cloud Tower. At the very least, her mage organization was one of the highest-level members of the Cloud Tower. Back when I was in the mage country, I was nothing more than a small shrimp. Apart from my friends from the Mystical Blade, I didn't have much contact with the higher-ups of the mage country. However, Marguerite was a candidate for the position of Truth Overseer, and she had lived here for more than 30 years. She could definitely be considered a local here. Outsiders would forever be outsiders. That barrier between us would require time and opportunity to slowly grind away. Right now, what we lacked the most was time. However, if we had the help of a local archmage, many things would become much more convenient. I had long since learned from Adam that if she wanted to, she would have had the chance to pass the internal selection of the Star Revelation and become a member of the Truth Overseers when she returned to the Mage Country. She had already rejected the Star Revelation's request to go traveling, but I had dragged her back here. It would be quite awkward for her to face a familiar face, so of course she would be displeased. Right now, not only did Marguerite shamelessly return to the Star Revelation and help me find out some information, but I didn't believe her, which naturally made her even more displeased. Is there anything else? If not, I'm going to go back and write a report. It was that report on whether the Lord of Yungyir has been active in the Northlands that was half a year late. H. You really are a super troublemaker. She was tapping her exquisite fingers on the table. It was obvious that she wasn't in a good mood. From a certain standpoint, this really was my fault. Back then, Marguerite and Amelia had used the excuse of investigating the undead and Lord of Yungyir in the Northlands as an excuse to set out under the name of the Cloud Tower. Yet, even after so many days had passed, not a single person had returned with an investigation report, a government-funded trip. From a certain standpoint, that was indeed correct. In that case, didn't Amelia, who was currently in hibernation, become a vegetable because of an accident while she was out on a business trip? How could she still receive government-funded medical treatment? Cough, cough, let's be serious. Yep, it was obvious that I couldn't count on Amelia to hand in a report right now. As the last mage in the Cloud Tower with the emblematic truths level information, Marguerite had to complete this report. Even if this report was destined to be meaningless, it would still be necessary for her to complete her previous work. She would even need to explain why Amelia hadn't returned with her. And so, the unfortunate great sage Marguerite was just like a naughty child who had too much fun and forgot about her summer homework. She was urged by her teacher and driven by endless regret to do meaningless homework that no one would take seriously. It was said that Marguerite hated doing meaningless homework the most. I'm really busy. That report needs to be submitted by the day after tomorrow. No wonder she had such a deep grudge against me. No wonder Adam pretended that he didn't know anything and did his best to hide in a corner so that he wouldn't have to worry about Marguerite taking out her anger on him for talking nonsense. I apologize. It's not that I don't trust you, it's that this matter is far too bizarre. How did the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country come to an agreement? That's impossible, isn't it? Still, I couldn't be blamed for doubting her. That was because what Marguerite had said was far too inconceivable. Mega empires like the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country would be like two high-speed trains once they entered a state of war. Their weight and momentum would be tremendous. How could they possibly stop just like that? The damage from the previous Forbidden Spells bombardment was still fresh in everyone's minds. The confrontation between the Dragon Knight and the Archmage on the Eastern Front was the latest news. Although I hadn't heard of any major losses on either side, and it seemed that both sides were still restraining themselves, it was impossible for both sides to simply greet each other and then go their separate ways. The Dragon Knight fought for its honor, while the Archmage had the confidence to be arrogant. Since both sides had met, it was likely that neither side would believe that they hadn't fought each other to test each other's strength. But if they fought, it would be impossible for either side to back down. And even if the Mage Country wanted to negotiate for peace, the Bardi Empire would never agree. One of their own fortresses had been destroyed, along with so many people. The Dragon Knight would need to get revenge, and the Bardi Empire would need to take revenge. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the Bardi Empire to explain itself to its citizens. Even if the Bardi Empire's upper echelons were able to restrain themselves from the threat of the undead, they would definitely provoke the Bardi Empire. In such a situation, the Bardi Empire and the Bardi Empire actually wanted to negotiate for peace. This was completely incomprehensible. However, Marguerite remained silent in response to my suspicions. However, Adam couldn't bear to watch this any longer. Cough, that's because you're not allowed to say it. The two of us exchanged glances in response to the furious Harloys, and then tacitly agreed to remain silent. At the very least, someone has to help me write that meaningless report. Marguerite seemed to be talking to herself, but I pretty much knew what I should say. Let me write the report. I'm the best at writing reports. Alright then, let's not talk about how incomprehensible it was for Emperor Yongye to personally write a report on whether the Lord of Yongye's activities existed in the Northlands. Let's not talk about how much I had to rack my brain over this damned report tonight. But at the very least, for now, the great philosopher finally nodded in satisfaction as she told me the secret information that very few people in the Cloud Tower knew about. The Holy War has begun. Although Marguerite's words were simple, Adam added something to them. The Holy Church's allied armies have crossed the Elladen Mountains and ambushed the Bardi Empire's southern border, Erkenfeld City. The war has erupted. I opened my mouth wide. I never expected that the Holy Church would actually get involved at such a time. According to my expectations, it would be impossible for the Holy Church to start a war in such a short period of time. Erkenfeld City? I checked the map. The Holy Church's territory wasn't even connected to Erkenfeld City, the Elladen Mountains. Isn't that the Penglin Alliance's territory? Don't they worship the Earth Mother Goddess? Why would they allow the Holy Church's allied armies to pass through? One day before the Holy War, the highest priest of the Penglin Alliance's Earth Mother Goddess Church converted to the god of Holy Light. The entire country converted to Holy Light, and then the allied armies entered Erkenfeld. They even brought with them the top 10 mercenary groups of the Penglin Alliance and the Holy Church's Holy Temple Knight Squadron. Alright then, it seemed that there was quite a bit of trickery involved. Perhaps the Penglin Alliance had long since joined the Holy Light faction. But no matter how unexpected the process was, the Holy Church's ambush was quite successful. How's the battle situation? Erkenfeld City's defending army was completely annihilated, and the city was lost. There's also the Holy War. You know what it means. As someone who was unlucky enough to be attacked by the Holy War, of course I knew. The Holy War was against heretics, and heretics' women and children were all evil. They were all targets that needed to be purified. The Holy War's wealth and land would be used to reward the holy believers who fought for their faith. There would only be one result for any city that was destroyed in the Holy War. They massacred the entire city. Although it was a question, she sounded very certain. Yep. The small room fell silent for a moment. Judging from the magical energy pulsating between Marguerite's eyebrows, she wasn't in a bad mood just because of that damned report. It was quite obvious why the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country were willing to negotiate for peace. Once the Holy War started, it would be impossible to stop. Not to mention, the Bardi Empire had an undead army that was growing like a malignant tumor. The Bardi Empire was basically facing enemies on 3 sides. Faced with such a desperate situation, even the most insane ruler would think of a method to temporarily negotiate with one side to reduce the pressure. Heh, don't look so grim. At least there's good news. At the very least, the Mage Country is willing to negotiate with the Bardi Empire. Our plan will become much easier. That's the second bad news. According to the latest intelligence reports, there's a 90% chance that the Bardi Empire will refuse to negotiate for peace. Not only will the war between the Mage Country and the Bardi Empire not stop, it's even likely to escalate. It seems that the Mags hope to use this opportunity to deal with their restless neighbor once and for all. Chapter 311. AD 392, the 16th year since the start of the new Holy War. Ever since the Holy War began, Emperor Aulus XIII of the Bardi Empire didn't show the decisiveness and initiative that he had since ascending to the throne. Instead, he constantly made extremely passive defensive decisions. Although he strengthened his military and prepared for war, he watched as the neighboring countries' wars fell into a stalemate. But in that year, the flames of war that no one could avoid still burned their heads. It was the undead who sought them out. On the 3rd month that the pitch-black night mysteriously enveloped the Bardi Empire's capital, the undead arrived. In a single night, countless dimensional doors opened up in various countries. The largest dimensional door opened up in the Bardi Empire's capital. On the same day, undead Emperor Asso of the Desecration Plane descended and cast a forbidden spell, Undead Calamity, in the capital. 90% of the population was transformed into undead, and the Bardi Empire was destroyed. This was actually a description of the Bardi Empire's background in the game's history. Aulus XIII, who originally had a good reputation, became a synonym for an embroidered pillow. This further proved that being indifferent to the Holy War was basically the same as waiting for death. However, the real world was obviously different from the virtual game world. At the very least, due to the existence of the 4 elemental gods and the absence of players, the elemental tide rose much faster than expected. The Holy War had begun several years earlier than expected. Even if the undead emperors would only descend 10 years later, the undead would arrive much earlier than in the game's history. The game's history has probably advanced the Holy War by around 9 to 15 years. Let's hope that Amdirokan's death will be slightly delayed. Otherwise, it'll be difficult for the new generation's heroes to mature. Of course, I wasn't too worried. To use an old saying, the flow of history was unstoppable. A few individuals and coincidences wouldn't be able to change the overall trend. Wars that were destined to erupt would most likely be unavoidable. And many things were far too complicated. There were far too many factors that would affect the outcome. It would be difficult to analyze the effects of success or failure. The war was brought forward, and the preparation period was shortened. This also meant that the human country's internal conflicts could be avoided to the greatest extent. It was impossible to calculate the gains and losses. The heroes in the game's history were still lacking in maturity. This would indeed have an impact. Nobody could count on the snot-nosed brat to come up with strategies. A newbie who hadn't been tempered would barely be a passable soldier, and they wouldn't be able to lead their own troops without any reputation. Nobody could guarantee that the heroes wouldn't be able to obtain enough nutrients to become the ruthless characters in the game's history. However, true heroes were still created by the times. Even if Hero A died, there would still be the current situation. Even if Hero A died, there would be even stronger Archmages B and C to Thief C. Who? On the other hand, the fact that there were no internal conflicts meant that the current famous generals didn't die in battle. The early battles also allowed the veterans of the previous generation to continue leading. Just the current elemental Biso's eagle was already quite difficult to deal with. In the game's history, Biso would choke to death 7 years later because he ate 2 half-cooked eggs in one go. Apart from those who committed suicide, it was impossible to choose how they died. Actually, the reason why some great heroes died was the greatest joke of their lives. When I saw this scene, I was quite proud of myself and secretly felt lucky. At the very least, the few times I died were quite perfect. I was happy that I died so perfectly, but it seemed that there was something wrong with me. Forget it, let's not look into it. Getting back to the main topic. Based on my understanding of history, estimating the butterfly effect caused by certain events was as unreliable as prophecy. The more you thought about it, the more mistakes you would make. The most obvious example was the Bardi Empire's history that I just mentioned. Should I say that the situation had worsened? At the very least, in the game's history, the Bardi Empire was still peaceful and prosperous during this period of time. It definitely wasn't like the current Bardi Empire was surrounded by enemies on 3 sides and could reach its end at any moment. But on the other hand, the undead scheme had already been thrown out into the open. Their scheme to destroy the Bardi Empire in one fell swoop had already failed. At the very least, it was impossible for the Bardi Empire to be destroyed in the future. In that case, should I say that the situation had improved? It's probably impossible for anyone to come to a conclusion. After all, even the god of fate wouldn't be able to clearly grasp fate. If you look too far ahead, you'll end up falling into the pit you're stepping on. Grasping the present is enough. That's right, all I could really do was grasp the present and sow the seeds of the future. Many a little makes a mickle, and I would do my best to guide the overall situation in a positive direction. That was why the light of law and the study of magical engineering were spread. That was also why the current system of justice points and the net of starlight were created. I believed that these seeds would eventually grow into towering trees that would influence the world for the better. Of course, this didn't mean that the game's history wasn't important. To be honest, I had always viewed the game's history as the greatest cheat of all. With the information and records provided by the game's history, I would be able to directly understand people and events. In fact, I would even be able to see many omens that normal people wouldn't be able to see and make predictions beforehand. However, this advantage would also become increasingly useless as the game's history changed. From a certain standpoint, this was quite contradictory. After all, the more changes there were, the more evidence that my hard work had been effective. Nobody would be able to understand or trust the Bardi Empire's history even if I told the public about it. And from a certain standpoint, at the very least, the princes of the Bardi Empire who were already vying for the throne would be the least willing to see the information contained in the game's history. After all, in their minds, their father, who was so old that he could die at any moment, was actually still able to easily live for more than 20 years. No matter how much trouble they caused, they would likely be nothing more than naughty monkeys in the hands of the Buddha. Just a short piece of information about an emperor who was still alive for more than 20 years was enough to change the political decisions of an entire country. This was the magical power of the little book. If the news that Emperor Bardi still had more than 20 years left to live was spread, the entire situation in the country would change. The first prince's faction and the 8th prince's faction would all disappear. However, the domain lords who couldn't wait to be reshuffled would probably directly rebel. The end result would be that there would be too many factors involved. There would be too many positive and negative effects, and the final outcome would still be unclear. When all the numbers were just variables, how could one possibly make a complete judgment based on a single point of information? If someone really did make such a judgment, it would only be because that person already knew the answer. Based on my common sense, only by gathering enough information and using the logical reasoning of many advisors would one be able to make a definite judgment about the future. Not only that, the accuracy would plummet as the information was lacking. That was why I never understood how the intelligent protagonists in stories were able to figure out a super scheme from a single detail. How could they make all the arrangements so precisely and without fail? How could they make all the individuals with different personalities dance in the palm of their hands? After all, even the same person could make different decisions based on their mood every single day. A large man who appeared bold on the outside might be quite meticulous on the inside. Guessing another person's current reaction would be the same as guessing what that person wanted to eat for dinner tonight. If someone could even guess everything like that, that would probably be an even more unreasonable cheat and main character aura than my history. Cough, I seem to have inadvertently made fun of something again. Let's get back to the main topic. Yep, let's get straight to the conclusion. Something was abnormal, incredibly abnormal. No matter if it was Arlo or Bardi, no matter if it was history or the present, everything felt incredibly strange. This strange part had been there from the very start. Why did the Bardi Empire insist on making trouble for the harmless mage country of Arlo? If it was just to expand their territory and influence, there were plenty of other options available to them. Why did the Bardi Empire insist on going after the hardest rock? The situation in Arlo was even stranger. Why did the eternally neutral Arlo Empire use forbidden spells as a last resort to counterattack against the Bardi Empire? Since when did the mags become even more impatient than berserkers? Why did the usually moderate neutral Bardi Empire suddenly become even more extreme than the radical Bardi Empire? And why didn't the other archmages of the Truth Symposium retaliate against their overly extreme actions? Why did the Bardi Empire refuse to negotiate for peace at such a time? Even if the mags destroyed the Bardi Empire, what benefits could they possibly obtain? Did they intend to change to farming instead? Meanwhile, although history had already happened, there were still many suspicious points. For example, the Bardi Empire was completely sealed off from the Bardi Empire, which was completely different from the current situation. Also, why were there no records of what happened to the Dragon Knight? Oh my, it feels like both sides are still treating me as an outsider. Considering all the information I had, no matter how I thought about it, it was like I was missing a large piece of a puzzle. I kept feeling like something was missing. Since it was highly unlikely that the mags would all go crazy together, there was naturally something I didn't know about, which was why the situation had developed so far beyond my expectations. It would seem that even Marguerite won't be able to obtain that information so easily. Thorn Garden and the recent research results that I had released were the best advertisement for me. Recently, I had indeed done my best to blend into the Cloud Tower and make the Archmages here acknowledge my existence. My system's continuously increasing reputation was also a statistical reflection that my recent efforts had indeed been effective. However, life wasn't a game. Even if my reputation reached the level of worship, that didn't mean that I would truly worship you. Trust was something that required time. I still had my reputation weighing me down, and I needed concrete actions to prove that I was trustworthy. All of this would require time to prove. And right now, I didn't have the time. That was why, even though I knew that Marguerite would be quite displeased, I still called her over to help me. After all, she was also a member of the Cloud Tower. Of course, it would be best if Amelia was here. I trusted in the Halit Dam goddess's abilities. Since she still hadn't received any information about the Cloud Tower, it was likely that only a few Archmages knew the truth. However, some people definitely knew, such as the person who had cast the forbidden spell. Since all the mage organizations had no objections to this, the leaders of the 18 top-level mage organizations would definitely know. And we would soon have to deal with one of them. The Sword of Order's leader, Black Eye? That's such a nostalgic name. The Cloud Tower's famous Tower of 10,000 Spells wasn't actually a mage tower, but rather an auditorium. It didn't seem large, but its interior had been enhanced with spatial magic. Its actual surface area was large enough to accommodate 10,000 people. In the Cloud Tower, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold, such technology was quite common. However, no matter how you compared this building to any other building, this building was the best of the best. The floor tiles were as white as jade, and they were made of magical mithril that had been refined many times over. The walls were made of star sand that seemed like ancient mysteries. Every seat was made of natural jade. Although there weren't any particularly extravagant decorations, just the materials used to construct this large conference room were far more expensive than any other human country. Normally, whenever a truth symposium was held, Archmages wearing extravagant mage robes would enter one by one. Magical books would float in front of every seat, and various documents would be projected onto a large screen in the middle of the room. The spectator stands would be filled with mags listening to the discussion. Every single resolution would be passed, and this place would become the center of Arlo due to the clamor of people. But today, the most central conference room was activated once again. Although the large round table in the middle wasn't full as usual, there were only a few seats missing. Even the spectator stands, which were usually filled, were completely empty. This was actually a private conference. 22 out of 28 soul counselors are here. 15 out of 18 organizations are here. This is probably the first time in the past 5 years that everyone is here. Since everyone knows how important this conference is, let's get straight to the topic. The Seven-Colored Tower was a paradise for elemental magic researchers. Archmage Antonio was also the strongest flame envoy and forbidden spell mage. However, his appearance and rotund body resembled a certain fast food restaurant's mascot, which made him seem rather friendly and slow. However, those who were truly familiar with him would know that he hadn't chosen the wrong profession. When he was younger, his explosive temper was even more intolerable than the inferno demons in the lower planes. Now that he was older, although he was much calmer, and the white-bearded old man also seemed like a mascot, even taking on the role of hosting this conference, everyone knew that this was just a facade. I'll just say it. This time, our problem is still the same thing, dragons. Chapter 312. While the Truth Symposium's Archmages were still working hard in the conference room, the outside of the conference room was as lively as a market. Groups of gnomes and dwarfs were loudly shouting and holding banners in the marble plaza. Flyers and banners were being distributed everywhere. Passers-by would also take 1 or 2 flyers for fun. Protesting is not wrong. Striking is right. I strongly request that the Archmages improve the treatment of all non-human workers in the Cloud Tower. It's not like we don't have second-class workers. Black Eye's alchemy laboratory closed down. That bastard boss lost 300,000 gold coins from gambling and eating. He took his mistress, third mistress, and fourth mistress and ran away. Black Eye, you're not human. Scum. Give me back my hard-earned money. You won't have a good ending. You'll definitely receive retribution. That's why, in order to raise our wages, we peasant workers are taking out that bastard's inventory and selling it at the lowest possible price. Don't let go of anyone who passes by. Alright, it would be rather unrealistic to imagine these gnomes and dwarfs waving banners and asking for a raise in wages. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the sight of the gnomes doing business among the protesters. However, there were some slogans with special meanings hidden among the protesters that seemed to be telling the truth. We don't want war. We want peace. The gnomes, who always carried various dangerous items with them, were no different from arms dealers in the eyes of most people. Indeed, it was quite amusing for them to raise such slogans. Why hasn't the war stopped yet? Our warriors are still bleeding, our women are becoming widows, and our children are becoming orphans. Although these slogans and banners were quite provocative, those who knew the truth found them laughable. That was because there were no Mage Country soldiers at all on the front lines. Most of the Mage Country soldiers were nobles' private soldiers in name only. They were probably only capable of maintaining law and order within the country. Right now, only archmages were fighting against the Dragon Knight on the front lines. What are they doing? They're probably performing some kind of art. The dwarfs who were raising banners and slogans in front of the Hall of 10,000 Spells were quite incomprehensible. To be honest, it was likely that even these dwarfs didn't know why they were here. Hey, old wine barrel, those guys are looking at us as if we're idiots. How much longer do you think we'll continue embarrassing ourselves here? Don't complain, Kevin. Where else can you find such a good deal for 10 gold coins a day just to shout slogans and stand on the street? It wasn't that the dwarf Kevin wasn't satisfied with the extra reward from his boss. He just felt that it was a little silly to paint a clean and handsome dwarf green and then hold up a green flag. It was like Aunt Adele's burnt and sticky celery cake back home. When he stood there, everything seemed to stick together, and it was very unappetizing. Didn't you see that the gnomes didn't complain? They painted red to represent fresh blood. TSK, 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 the combination of red and green, coupled with the gnomes' disgusting prickly heads, it's simply. That's right, it's like a fly nailed to a piece of fat. Putting aside the gnomes' usual nitpicking, the gnomes were far more enthusiastic in their cheers than the gnomes, who didn't lack money at all. They were even patrolling left and right, hoping that their employer would see them working hard and give them more work. If they could make their employer happy, it would be even better if they could increase their wages. Is there any point in doing this? The archmages ignored him. Their conference has already been going on for 2 days. Nobody dares to go in and disturb them. Then you don't understand. Our employer never does meaningless things. Since he's spending money on us, he naturally has his own plans. The old dwarf paused at this point, until little Kevin tactfully and painfully took out his private tobacco pouch, filled it up and lit it up. Then, he took a deep puff fiercely. Our employer's main goal isn't to have them do as they say. He only wants to express his opinion. I know that you intend to start a war, and I'm against it, or I know that you're hiding something, and I'm not happy about it. Why don't we just rush into the conference? Directly express our demands. Those arcane guardians probably won't be able to stop our boss. That's no different from breaking off all relations with them. And offending the entire Truth Symposium in the Mage Country. Can't youngsters use their brains a little more? That's why our employer's orders are to just stay here and shout our slogans. If anyone tries to chase us away, we'll leave. And since nobody's chasing us away even after so long, their answer is, do whatever you want. We don't care. We absolutely can't let this information leak. In the conference room, a certain archmage spoke up. Clap. However, the next instant, the door to the conference room opened, and a blue-robed mage walked in. Behind him were the arcane guardians that had been torn apart into scrap metal. Roland, do you know what you've done? That's right, that was me. I was an unlucky individual who had been ostracized by the Truth Symposium, a foreman who had to take his subordinates and ask for their wages. Fine then, it seemed that I had accidentally made a mistake again. But at this moment, Oslo Wen, the truth overseer of the mystical blade, shouted angrily. However, I knew that he was speaking on behalf of the Truth Symposium. In a way, he was trying to protect me. Otherwise, I would likely have to face the fact that I had accidentally offended the entire Truth Symposium, and the leader of an enemy organization would take this opportunity to attack me. I glanced at the faces on the conference table. This was truly nostalgic. Many of them were people I wanted to kill, or people who wanted to kill me. At the very least, there was Black Eye, who was annoyed by the advertising words I had personally written, and he was glaring at me viciously. I know that you all want to hide it, but what do you intend to do if I already know? Do you intend to silence me? Heh, let's talk about those dragons and giants together. Opportunities will always come quietly, but they will only favor those who are prepared. Half an hour ago, an unexpected coincidence gave me the key to open that door. Halent came looking for me. He's already waiting for me in the guest hall. I wasn't surprised at all when I heard this news. After all, I had already received news of the peace negotiations. If Halent was really an envoy from the Bardi Empire, then everything could be explained. When I returned to Thorn Garden and walked into the hallway, I didn't see the cold handsome Beifeng who didn't speak much. Instead, I saw Beifeng, who was supposed to accompany me, sneaking out for some fresh air. Beifeng also heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that I had returned. You're still uncomfortable? I'm a superior dragon, after all. Although I know it's nothing, I still instinctively feel uncomfortable. I nodded thoughtfully. Although draconians were called draconians, they were actually created from a small amount of dragons' blood and an intelligent species' secret magic. In the hierarchy of dragons, draconians were probably even lower than the semi-dragons, who had low intelligence. They were born to be servants and slaves. And it just so happened that the underground world's draconians were all slaves of the color dragons. In fact, they were even created by the dragons. Halent was a descendant of the color dragons, a blue dragon. Furthermore, he had the potential to transform into a dragon in the future. There was such a huge difference in the hierarchy of dragons, so of course Beifeng would feel uncomfortable. Why did they ask you to be their host? Isn't this the same as asking Pleasant Goat to receive the big bad wolf a sheep to receive the evil wolf? They probably felt that I, as a saint, would be the most suitable host. I didn't expect that even though my power level increased, the suppression from my bloodline became even more severe. However, that brat gave me a rather unique feeling. It was as if I was facing Lady Ein Mezus. Little Red. A Dragon Queen level bloodline. No wonder he was able to become the vice leader of the Dragon Knight Squadron at such a young age. Beifeng shook his head and focused his attention on the Dragon Knight Duke, who was still resting in the living room. His white face seemed to have been through a lot, and his head and armor were covered in sand. There were even some silver strands on his forehead at such a young age. It would seem that he hadn't been living well ever since we parted ways in the Forest of Dreams. I have some news. I'm currently going to meet the Truth Symposium, but they're apparently in a secret meeting. Could you introduce me to them? Halent immediately stood up and spoke hurriedly the moment they met. His tone seemed to be rather anxious. Don't be in such a hurry. Let's talk slowly. But right now, Halent's eyes were completely blank as if he had just received some sort of shock. He lost all patience and immediately activated a memory crystal. This is also something that a lord wanted me to tell you. The circulation of mana on the table transformed into ripples of mana that formed a hazy scene in midair. This was a wasteland. The sky was grey, and the ground was grey. It was as if all life here had been dyed in a gloomy color. What attracted Halent's attention were the numerous statues that reached the clouds. These statues all had different postures. Some were standing with swords, some were sitting cross-legged and reading, and some were angrily roaring at the sky. However, they all had inconceivably strong bodies and handsome faces, just like those of classical heroes. Their existence here was the truth, as if it had never changed since time immemorial. However, these gigantic statues weren't the only ones here. At the feet of the gigantic statues, numerous small stone people were awakening from their slumber. They shook off their bodies and transformed back into physical bodies. Once the perfect seal created by the four elements was broken, the spatial seal was removed, and the stone statues woke up from their long slumber. Numerous small stone people woke up from their slumber. It was as if they naturally knew what they were supposed to do. They casually picked up rocks and earth to create weapons. Just like that, they used their ancestors' bodies as ladders to climb upwards, just like ants climbing up a human body. However, their climbing wasn't smooth at all. Often, they wouldn't even reach their knees before they would suddenly be attacked by flying mosquitoes, causing them to fall down once again. What's this? A battle between the statues of ants and mosquitoes? Halent had a bitter smile when he heard this. Those ants are giants. Yep, ancient giants that are at least 10 meters tall. And those mosquitoes are dragons. Those statues. Titan giants. The Titan giants are about to awaken. That's right, these small stone people that weren't even the size of the toes of the gigantic statues were what other species referred to as giants. This game of ants and mosquitoes was an epic battle between giants and dragons. When I made a slight comparison, those towering statues were the legendary Titan giants that were capable of contending against the gods. Since the elemental balance was disrupted, the exiled four-element seal lost a portion of its power. And so, the sealed silver species returned. Attack! The slumbering titans have returned. Chapter 313. Giants and dragons were probably the oldest species still living in this world. Back when the goddesses of order and chaos were still in harmony, they hoped that this world wouldn't be so desolate. Only under the dual influence of order and chaos were so many species born. The past events of the immemorial era had become a mess. Countless legends and epics had been passed down to the present day, but they were now nothing more than novels. But at the very least, among the gold citizens, the gold elves, metal dragons, angels, and titan giants were the rulers of the world at that time, as well as the victors of the First Holy War. But time was merciless. The descendants of rulers who lost their crowns often had worse lives than ordinary commoners. The first generation of the gold species didn't have a good life. The gold elves were overthrown by their own species, the superior elves. It was hard to say if the current superior elves counted. The descendants of the angels became the gods' subordinates, while the Titan giants were nothing more than legends and historical remains. As time passed, very few people would remember that when the gold species were finally unable to endure the pain of war, or disappeared from history, or went into seclusion, the second generation of the Holy War was supported by the fallen giants and the superior elves, the Moon Elves. The Moon Elves, who were viewed as traitors by the Gold Elves, also lost absolute control over the elves. In fact, the entire elven species lost their ruling status in this world. The Moon Elves didn't have it easy either. Without the Titan giants' absolute rule, the giants were split into two factions in the Holy War. They lost their last drop of blood in the Long War. Now, the giants had lost most of their intelligence and became scattered tribes. There were also legends that some giant species directly left the mortal plane in order to avoid the god of wisdom's curse of mental retardation. Now, they established a country in another plane that belonged only to the giants. But in reality, apart from a small minority that still retained their intelligence, most of the giants were no different from wild beasts. If they appeared in a densely populated area, it was likely that the intelligent species would send their armies to surround and annihilate them. It could be said that the giants were the most pitiful species in the past. However, I obtained some information from Ale that was close to the truth. There was only one reason for the giants' decline: the Titan giants were no longer around. This was just like an organized empire that suddenly lost its ruler. Not only that, but all those in power were unwilling to submit to anyone else. Plus, there were the constant temptations from other species, demons, as well as the giants' arrogant nature of worshipping power. It would be strange if the empire didn't split apart. In that case, the most fundamental problem was that in this world, only the gods would be able to make the first-generation Titan giants, who were powerful enough to challenge the gods, disappear. And judging from how the entire giant species was cursed, the gods truly didn't like the giants. It would be quite difficult to find out what was going on in the past, and there wouldn't be much meaning in trying to find out. After all, who knew which generation of main gods the legendary god of wisdom was? But judging from how his curse was still effective even after his god's name disappeared, he was definitely a top-tier main god back in the day. However, If the Titan giants were to return one day and dispel the curse on the giants, they would be able to reunite the various giant tribes. Things would get really interesting if that happened. They're traitors, plotters, and god-killers. They're the enemies of all the gods. When Ale talked about the ancient Titan kings, he became much more serious, which was rare for him. And when he talked about where the Titan giants were now, even Ale indicated that he didn't know either. After all, he hadn't participated in the Titan giants' invasion back then. And judging from the game's attack on the giants' expansion pack in the game's history, it seemed that the Titan giants' return wasn't far away. In the game's story, the returning Titan giants unhesitatingly declared war on both sides of the Holy War. The Titan giants' individual power levels far surpassed all other creatures. They'll return sooner or later, but it's highly unlikely that they'll return for this Holy War. No, they'll definitely return for this Holy War. At the time, Ale sounded quite certain. However, I unhesitatingly dispelled his hopes. Even now, I still remembered Ale's rare annoyance when he had to face the Titan Kings. I also knew that the Titan Giants wouldn't miss out on this attack on the Giants expansion pack. But in the game's history, this expansion pack was obviously quite late in the game. After all, it would be impossible for the players at the beginning to deal with the Titan Giants invasion. Even if the Titan Giants were destined to return, I hadn't expected that they would arrive so quickly. But if I thought about the past, the Titan Giants' early arrival actually had something to do with me. Due to a change in the Earth elemental plane, the 4 elemental dimensions are beginning to collapse. It's only a matter of time before the Titan Giants are petrified. The elements were mutually reinforcing and subduing each other. This was the most basic rule of this world. And the most powerful seal in this world was a seal that simulated the natural circulation of the elements. As long as this seal was activated, the 4 elements would begin circulating, and this world would become like a real world with no exit. And this seal's foundational principle was to imitate Aish's creation of the world. Theoretically speaking, since the Earth elemental dimensions were created based on this world, it would be impossible for any sealing spell to be more powerful than this. And this seal was obviously of a higher level than the one we had created. It absorbed the power of the 4 elements from the 4 elemental planes, creating an illusion of a real world. Even if the world changed, even if the masters of the elemental planes changed, as long as the 4 elemental planes still existed, the sealed dimension would still be effective. But not long ago, in order to kill the Earth elemental god, a certain someone directly shattered the foundation of the elemental planes, the elemental throne. This was the same as killing a flock of hens for the sake of killing an egg. This caused the entire seal to collapse by 1/4. If this was a normal time period, this imbalance could still be adjusted. But right now, the 2 elemental gods were everywhere, and the 2 elemental gods were nowhere to be found. The wind and water elemental tides were furiously increasing, while the Earth elemental plane was absorbing the Earth elemental tide in reverse. It was basically impossible for the Earth elemental plane to be balanced. So you're saying that it's only a matter of time before the Titan Giants return? But what does this have to do with you dragons? Why do dragons exist in that memory crystal? Back then, I directly asked Halent about this, and he gave me an answer. The long passage of time could erase all traces. Very few people noticed that the gold and sulfur species from the immemorial generation hadn't all left the mortal plane. However, the only species that could still be seen roaming the mortal plane was the dragons. Of course, the only reason why the gold and sulfur species were still able to survive was because at a certain point in time, the gold and sulfur species became disgusted with this war. They privately came to an understanding with their own species, and simultaneously took away all the dragons and dragon descendants from both sides. This was how the current generation of dragons came to be. Dragons were a unified species. There were many different species, and there were so many subspecies that it was impossible to count them all. However, there were 2 main species that were most active in the mortal plane, the color dragons and the metal dragons. The third main species, the gem dragons, weren't even from this world. Their abilities and personalities were quite unique. Although they looked quite similar to ordinary dragons, they were quite different on the inside. Not only that, Dragons were one of the few species that had the ability to travel across dimensions and live in other planes. It wasn't strange for gem dragons to have other species that existed in other planes. The metal dragons were the goddess of order's favorites. They were named after the metallic luster of their scales, representing the gold and silver dragons. Since they were creations of order, they often had their own goals and self-discipline. Gold dragons were one of the rare dragons of justice, silver dragons pursued order and peace, and copper dragons loved jokes and pranks. They were the easiest to deal with out of all the dragons. Of course, this was only relative. In contrast, the color dragons weren't so easy to deal with. These were the black and red dragons from the underground world. The blue dragons were the same. They all had something in common. White dragons were incredibly stupid beasts, black dragons were sly and good at lying, red dragons loved to fight and scheme, blue dragons were highly aggressive, and green dragons loved to prey on intelligent creatures, especially elves. They were the elves' mortal enemies. If I really had to find something in common, it would be that they were incredibly difficult to deal with, incredibly annoying, incredibly greedy, and loved to cause trouble for others. The dragons weren't all that peaceful either. Every family had different personalities, so there would always be trouble. Not to mention, there were far too many personality differences between each species of dragons. Red and silver dragons were mortal enemies, while gold and black dragons were mortal enemies. Dragons also fought amongst themselves several times. At the very least, the black and red dragons who lost in the battles were exiled to the underground world. Since they were all incredibly powerful and didn't have any mortal enemies, most of the surface dragons lived scattered lives. A single dragon would have its own territory with its own kobolds, griffins, and other species. At most, they would live in a family of 3 to 5. But since some of Ael's peers were still alive, Dragon City on the surface still had a certain degree of control over the dragons. However, this control was basically zero unless it was absolutely critical. In exchange for our entire species withdrawing from the Holy War, we reached an agreement with the current main gods of order and chaos. We'll forever guard the Titan giants and the world known as Aladashia. So, you're saying that we've already lost control? Although it's already showing signs of collapse, it's greatly accelerated since 2 months ago. It's likely that it's only a matter of time before the Titan giants awaken. I don't know the exact time, but it won't be more than 10 years. However, the ordinary giants will probably be able to return to the Earth elemental plane soon. 2 months ago? I just happened to be in the Earth elemental plane, so it would be best not to ask about that. Don't you have any other plans? Did you not make any preparations at all? Originally, with my power level, it would have been impossible for me to have access to such information. However, a senior recently told me that she and His Majesty Aulus had originally planned to connect the undead planes to Aladashia so that the undead emperors and the giants would fight each other and exhaust each other. This was also part of the agreement between Bardi and Dragon City. However, it's obviously impossible now. Halent's tone didn't contain any resentment. However, it was obvious that I had something to do with this, which was why I did my best to pretend that I didn't know anything and just looked up at the sky. That fortress that was destroyed by the Mage Country's forbidden spell? And what's the relationship between Bardi and the Mage Country? That fortress used to be another undead emperor's base. Large numbers of zombies have already appeared there, and the sacrifices are nearing the end. If we don't deal with it properly, it'll become another Port Victoria. That's why His Majesty Aulus ordered the Truth Symposium to send forbidden spell mags to wipe it out. So, the higher-ups of Bardi and Dragon City have always been in contact. No, only His Majesty Aulus and a certain archmage from the Truth Symposium have been in contact. Dragon City's representative in Bardi also participated in this matter, Lady Evelyn. It's precisely because of Lady Evelyn's order that I'm telling you this information. Yep, it's at least 1/3 of Lady Evelyn's order. Evelyn? Yep, Lady Evelyn said that you definitely wouldn't dare to forget her. Has it affected you? My memory isn't that bad. Isn't she Cher's adopted mother? Judging from Halent's strange expression, I seemed to have guessed wrong. He suddenly gripped the letter in his hand and transformed it into dust with lightning. Lady Evelyn also said that if you really forgot, apart from not giving this letter to you, she must tell you something else. What is it? Could it be that Evelyn really was an old acquaintance of mine? She knew that I might intentionally forget her. She still had a backup plan. Lady Evelyn's original words were, "Cher is your daughter, so you're not allowed to do anything to her." Haha, that's right. The silly cat was rolling around on the table in laughter. She was using an incredibly evil method to make her presence known. Congratulations to my host for receiving an honorable title. Do you prefer the title of Demon Father or Crow Mouth? The Demon Father series has Cher has a good father, while the Crow Mouth series has I Believe in You, B.Y. Bailey. Forget it, I'll give you a great discount this time. Cher has a good father named Roland Bailey. Chapter 314. I know everything now. What do you intend to do? Silence me? Since you've said so, you're dead for sure. The furious archmages all roared viciously as they all took out their staffs and randomly shot all sorts of magic at me. They wanted to kill me in just a few moments. This was obviously impossible. After all, they weren't warriors who used their muscles to think, nor were they fanatics who wanted to cleanse everything. Mags tended to understand and communicate with each other, and they were especially patient with their own kind and juniors. Since you know, add a chair for me. Star Revelations Auntie Amala understood as she sipped some tea without even opening her eyes. Why was she called Auntie Amala? Apart from the obvious motherly aura of this purple-haired female mage who always wore a headscarf, she was also Marguerite's teacher. She was also the one who allowed a rogue mage like Marguerite to enter the world of mags. In fact, she was even the one who helped transform Marguerite into an undying existence. Of course, I still remembered the first time we met. Considering our relationship, I took the initiative to greet her. Good morning, Auntie. Oh, after a light sigh, the atmosphere on the street suddenly became quite strange. The originally bustling street instantly became empty. My shadow transformed into a living creature that bound me, and the stone floor suddenly transformed into a magical beast that swallowed me whole. The next second, everything returned to normal. The sky was still as blue as ever, and there was no damage at all on the street. Only then did I realize that everything had been an illusion. Actually, you can call me Sister Amala. An illusion? A soul world? No, it's not such a simple thing. All right then, from that day onward, I began to respect the Cloud Tower's mags even more. At the very least, these mags who appeared to be ordinary little girls were actually ancient artifacts who had lived to this day. Although they were all semigods, it was impossible to calculate the difference in power level between semigods. For mags, experience and knowledge were both important factors in power level. I had heard of the blind Amala back when I was still an acolyte. I still needed to show proper respect to this unfathomably old witch. At such a time, I decisively expressed my gratitude. Thank you, Auntie Amala. You're so understanding. As expected, I blacked out before I even finished speaking. Oh, it's here again. The feeling of being forgotten in a corner of the world and then being devoured. Why aren't you continuing? This time, it stopped halfway, and the world returned to normal. Sigh. Then, I heard a certain lady sigh. I shrugged, feeling that it was a pity that I had missed the chance to find out the other party's trump card. I casually pulled out a chair and sat down. The door behind me slammed shut, which doubtlessly meant that a new round of rituals had begun, and I was now one of them. Epic storyline: return home in glory or fall to the ground like a phoenix. It will be fully activated. The next step of development will be decided based on your results in the meeting. My system was always one step late. But since I was already here, and I had already completed my goal, it would be nice to be able to earn some fate points along the way. Based on my past experience, although there wouldn't be any rewards to look forward to in the middle of these quests, there would always be surprises to look forward to at the end. Then, let's move on to the next topic. Pa, an elderly mage wearing reading glasses trembled as he picked up his document. He was just about to change the topic when he was interrupted by a round of clapping. I glanced over, and as I expected, it was the same brat who had just sat down. It was fine if it was a coincidence once, but it was obvious that he was doing it on purpose twice. This time, most of the mags present were dissatisfied. Any ordinary person would probably pee their pants from being stared at by so many mags with the divine truths of truth. But for me, didn't those unfriendly gazes and the frightening pressure from their weak bodies mean that they couldn't do anything to me? I really enjoyed being able to kill you with looks. Fine, fine. This time, I really wasn't intentionally causing trouble. Don't you all want to know where I learned the truth? I just received information from Bardi. Does anyone want to know? The Titan's return has sped up. The giants outside the walls have returned. Don't stare at me like that. I'll get embarrassed if you act so passionately. Do you all want to see an old man blush so much? Pervert. At that moment, I had a godly acting skill as I curled my pinky finger and lightly gestured. That damned pinky finger. Nobody has ever been able to disgust so many archmages who don't care about worldly affairs with a single action, making them want to kill him. By all the archmages participating in this conference. The conference's progress? It had already been 2 days since the conference ended. Would there be any results just because I was here? Especially when I brought new problems with me. As expected, there's no solution to this problem. The only thing that could cause so many archmages to fall into such a predicament was the current stalemate. For the mage country of Arlo, the best situation would be for the mage country to remain neutral and defend itself. However, this was obviously impossible. Just because you didn't go looking for trouble didn't mean that trouble wouldn't come looking for you. From a certain standpoint, Bardi's Emperor Aulus was truly a sly old fox. He was probably the first person to fall into this trap. His country had already been targeted by the undead more than 30 years ago. This was the first problem. The second problem was the Dragon Knight Squadron. The proud dragon descendants obediently listened to the human empire's commands. However, this wasn't just because I guessed that they were half-blood bastard children's nursery. They had actually always been on a mission to guard the Dragon World. What was Dragon World? It was the world where the Titan giants slept. That world was indeed an eternal prison prepared specifically for the Titan giants and their bloodline. However, due to the abnormally high elemental density, it's especially suitable for dragon eggs to hatch, young dragons to grow, old dragons to live in retirement, and young dragons to give birth. That's why you guys converted the Titan Giants prison into a nursery and nursing home? Giving birth and nursing home? Turning it into a sex house? From a certain standpoint, I had to hand it to the dragons. However, for them, this was probably just like how humans would think about their surroundings when they moved. They would move to a warmer island that was more suitable for living. As for the Titan Giants, they haven't woken up in tens of thousands of years. They definitely won't wake up in our generation. Alright then, although this sounded ridiculous, it wasn't just the dragons who thought this way. So what if they pollute the water and air? I can't drink it anyways. Save energy. Oil will run out. Relax, there'll definitely be new technology to solve this problem. Perhaps the first generation of dragons would seriously guard the Titan Giant's seal. The second generation would only occasionally look at the Titan Giant's seal. Several dozen or even several hundred generations later, the Titan Giant's seal would be nothing more than a distant legend. Enjoying the most comfortable environment in the world was the most practical thing right now. Have you ever considered that if the Titan Giants really do wake up, and if they wake up really quickly, neither the old dragons nor the young dragons will be able to escape? Actually, no matter if they were dragons or humans, as long as they were intelligent species, there was no foundational difference between how they thought about things that didn't concern them and how they were suicidal. Only now did I realize that the dragons are also a group of self-destructive optimists who dig their own grave. I still remembered that when I said this, Aulus's face was as red as a monkey's butt. The handsome boy lowered his head and blushed as if he was embarrassed. He looked just like a shy little girl, which was quite admirable. Yep, ignoring the cause and effect, the conclusion was obvious. The dragons definitely had a secret agreement with the Bardi Empire, which was why every generation of the Bardi Empire had a Dragon Knight squadron. Of course, the dragons would also receive assistance from the ruler of this country, such as providing laborious, food and water resources, and providing protection for imports and exports. And since this country had a Dragon Knight protecting it, the citizens wouldn't be too surprised if a dragon occasionally appeared. Dragon World was one of the top 3 dragons in Aeshi. But now that the Titan giants had awakened, it had become the cruelest battlefield. The dragons would probably do their utmost to stall the giants for the sake of successfully transferring their young dragons and dragon eggs. But once the true Titan giants entered the battlefield, things would probably get out of hand. Does Aulus know? Does he know that the Titan giants might return in this holy war? As the emperor of the Bardi Empire, he probably knew when he ascended to the throne. As for why I called Aulus a sly old fox, that was because he clearly knew that his own country was in trouble, yet he still furiously expanded his territory, dragging other countries into trouble as well. Where's the entrance to Dragon World? Why haven't they evacuated all the dragons and young dragons? The entrance to Dragon World is in the Bardi capital. As for why they haven't evacuated, it's not that they don't want to evacuate. It's that it's impossible to evacuate. The order to evacuate was given more than 100 years ago, but some dragon eggs' mothers don't even know where they are. And, the situation there is quite special. Only after I asked him did I learn that Dragon World really had become a world for dragons. There were many dragons there, and since there were no natural enemies and the environment was good, they could simply bury their dragon eggs and wait for them to automatically sprout. Plus, dragons were naturally lustful by nature. There were many semi-dragons, dragons, and mixed-blood dragons living there. Otherwise, Dragon World wouldn't have become one of the top 3 dragons' residences. What do the dragons think of the undead? This question made Halent even more embarrassed. He didn't say anything for quite a while. In the end, he could only helplessly shake his head. All right then, I didn't even need to guess. Those gigantic lizards that could eat mortals with a single bite probably couldn't be bothered to care. What? The threat of the undead? Don't they already have a Dragon Knight squadron? What does the mortal world have to do with us? Don't disturb our sleep. Keep arguing. I'll eat you all in one bite if you keep arguing. Now, it was likely that their dragon eggs were in danger, which was why they hurriedly asked for reinforcements. And since the Cloud Tower was one of the few existences that they respected, it was likely that the Cloud Tower was the closest to them, as well as the only mortal who would ask for reinforcements. No matter if it was an undead invasion or the return of the Titan giants, both would be major trouble. And if both of them came together, it would be a major problem. By the way, in the game's history, Emperor Asso seemed to have fallen into Aulus's trap as well. If he had opened the dimensional door to the Bardi Empire's capital, he would likely have had a friendly clash with the Titan giants. If he had opened the dimensional door to the Bardi Empire's capital, it was likely that the giants and the undead would have already started fighting in Dragon World. In that case, it was only natural that the Titan giants would arrive so late. In this generation, Aulus was still a sly old fox. Now that I thought about it, it was likely that he still had some influence over the undead. No matter if it was Victoriaport or that fortress that had been destroyed by a forbidden spell, they both had one thing in common: they were both located near the Bardi Empire's border, and they just happened to be near the Mage Country's territory. In fact, they were even closer to the Cloud Tower than they were to the Bardi Empire's capital. And once the undead army appeared, with Aulus causing trouble, all Bardi needed to do was maintain its alliance with the undead. If it weren't for the Forest of Dreams and the Mage Country's decisive forbidden spell, it would have been quite obvious that the undead calamity would have broken through to the Mage Country. And that forbidden spell that destroyed another undead emperor's plan to open a dimensional door to the Bardi Empire might have eliminated the threat, but it also completely dragged the Mage Country into trouble. Perhaps even the sacrifice at Victoriaport was a show for the Mage Country to see. It was to prove how vicious Aulus was towards himself and his enemies. Perhaps he had even threatened to open all dimensional doors to the Mage Country's border if the Mage Country didn't do anything. P2e. Perhaps Aulus even notified the Mage Country beforehand. No wonder Amelia knew about this. But no matter what the Cloud Tower chooses, they still won't be able to escape from this trouble. What a familiar style. It's clearly an overt plot. It resonates with you. It's the exact same dirty method you used. Heloise, please call him the wisdom of an adult. Not long ago, Aulus seemed to have achieved his goal. At the very least, the Mage Country had suffered greatly, and the archmages in their ivory towers were now forced to fight to the death against the undead. Alright then, let's not argue about how good Aulus was at tricking people. At any rate, both sides had screwed up. The undead were invading ahead of schedule. Due to the existence of the Forest of Dreams and the location of the dimensional doors, it was likely that the direction of the invasion would change. And, the Titan giants had awakened much earlier than expected. It was likely that the dimensional doors would still open in the capital, and Aulus would probably be stomping about anxiously. How strong are the Titan giants? I had asked Halent this question before. Now, I was asked the same question again at the Truth Symposium. However, the result would probably be the same. I don't know. There are no records of them at all. Of course, there were no records. It was unknown when the Titan giants had been sealed away. The gods had intentionally erased all records regarding the Titan giants, so how could I possibly know how strong they were? However, I knew that the Titan giants that had been sealed away were all undying existences. Even the main gods back in the day were unable to completely destroy them. It would be more appropriate to treat them as main gods. In that case, what do the dragons intend for us to do? Help them take care of the giants. Let me say this first, I have no intentions of becoming cannon fodder for those lizards. We can try communicating with the Titan giants. Nice idea. I nodded. Perhaps thinking about things from a different perspective would make things much more interesting. This was indeed a common method used by mags, but that's impossible. In ancient times, the Titan giants would look down on inferior imitations of their own physical characteristics. And the giants are related to the ogres by blood. Yep, you guessed correctly. The giants will eat people. Would you discuss with the eggs in your bowl how to pretend to be a family tomorrow? This wasn't a lie at all. This was an interesting story that I had heard from Ale. The Titan giants' bloodline was a major family. Not only were there giants, ogres, and other commonly seen large human species, there were even dwarfs and stone beastmen among them. The Great Demon Empire and the Great Elf Empire were mortal enemies from the same generation. They became the rulers of this world one after the other. The epic feud between the Titan giants' children and the Gold Elf King was still a classic opera in the opera house. But soon, it was likely that there would be an additional The Forgotten Countries and The Forsaken, currently being written by Roland, in the opera house. Those lizards aren't that stupid. What they want us to do is to think of a way to maintain the balance of the elements and delay the Titan giants' revival. This will give them more time to relocate and prepare for battle. So you're saying, yep, we either need to quickly kill off those 2 elemental gods that are running around everywhere, or we need to find 2 more elemental creatures to ascend to godhood. At the very least, we need to achieve a balance of the element. Yep, it would be far too difficult to kill off 2 elemental gods who were most likely hiding in their own dimensions. In the end, there would only be one choice. We just killed off the Earth elemental god, and now we need to create a new one? Is this really the result of our own actions? Chapter 3:15. The second day after I left the conference room, the Truth Symposium sent me a small golden badge in the shape of a question mark, which finally added some weight to my chest. Although this small badge wasn't much, it meant that the Truth Symposium would notify me as soon as they held a formal meeting in the future. They would also reserve a seat for me, and the Great Industrial Party was now recognized by everyone as a powerful mage organization. My bastard subordinates could finally hold their heads high. As for whether or not the Truth Symposium had any results, of course not. If just sitting together and drinking tea, chatting, and having a conference could solve all problems, then the world would be far too easy to live in. Naturally, there wouldn't be any wars. Aulus and the dragons had a simple way of thinking. After all, if the Titan giants appeared, all of human society would be doomed. Helping us would be the same as helping yourself, and helping us would be fine as well. At any rate, we would all be doomed together. At any rate, Bardi would never be able to escape this holy war. They had nothing to lose, so they were quite optimistic about it. As for the mags, it was certain that they weren't in a good mood. Nobody would feel good about being randomly made a scapegoat. It was no wonder that they were completely uninterested in Bardi's so-called peace treaty. Judging from Halent's description, the dragons were quite optimistic. They probably believed that as long as they stabilized the elemental throne and then had the archmages repair the seal, they would be able to protect Dragon World. In fact, since the Holy War was going quite smoothly, some dragons even believed that the Titan giants were nothing special. Perhaps they could even fight to the death against the Titan giants. I could understand their overly optimistic mentality. After all, if someone predicted that Earth would soon be destroyed and caused everyone to panic, humanity's first reaction definitely wouldn't be to work together to develop space technology so that they could migrate to other planets. Instead, they would first kill the Jinxer and then think of a way to save the world. Perhaps a few world-saving heroes would appear out of nowhere. Nobody would be willing to give up on their home until the very last moment. However, it was obvious that it would be quite difficult for a world-saving hero to appear in a dramatic fashion. That was because things had gone too far this time. Saving the world was far too difficult for any individual to accomplish. If we want to balance the elemental planes, there are only two choices. Either we ensure that all 4 elemental gods are in balance, or we kill all of them. Emotionally speaking, I was leaning towards the former. After all, the wind and water elemental gods were still connected to me, and I still had information on the water elemental god. Perhaps I would be able to use it in the future. But strategically speaking, I was leaning towards the latter. That would reduce the increase of the elemental tide and reduce the difficulty of the elemental planes. But it could be said that it would be far too difficult to kill the other 2 elemental gods. If I were the wind elemental god or the water elemental god, after the fire elemental god and the earth elemental god perished, I would definitely obediently hide in my own nest, resolutely refusing to come out until the outside world was turned upside down. Lorcan, who was heavily injured and on the verge of death, was already so difficult to deal with even in his own territory. I didn't want to know just how powerful an elemental god in perfect condition would be in his own dimension. As for the latter, although it would be quite difficult, it was actually possible to accomplish. After all, Eliza was the one who devoured the fire elemental god, and the earth elemental throne's shard was still in my frigid winter earth. Plus, I had a veteran earth elemental god, the stone sculptor. As long as I invested enough, it wouldn't be impossible to create 2 more elemental gods. However, I didn't take the initiative to take on this task during the meeting. Providing help in a time of need and adding flowers to a brocade were 2 completely different things. I wasn't foolish enough to take on this difficult task myself so quickly. In that case, let's temporarily put aside the dragon's request. If anyone has any plans, please bring them up as soon as possible. In the end, the meeting didn't come to a conclusion on this topic. After all, this task was far too difficult. Even if I threw it into the system, it would at least be an epic level quest. Did I jinx it again? Congratulations, Comrade Bailey. Your epic level side quest, Investiture or Godslaying, has been activated. Quest requirements, you understand. Quest reward, you understand. Punishment for failing to complete the quest, you understand. The hell I understand. I hate things like you understand the most. Is it really that difficult to explain things clearly? Understand? Understand? The hell you understand? Why do you have to make me so confused? I don't understand at all. Alright then, after complaining for a while, I could only helplessly accept reality and take the initiative to prepare for this quest. Yep, as soon as I thought about the punishment, my imagination began to wander in crazy directions. What type of punishment will it be? Doesn't my system love making things that I hate the most? Forcefully making Princess Peach a permanent character? Possessing a spearman with negative misfortune for more than a week? Or even having him participate in a bodybuilding competition that Omar has? Sometimes, people's imaginations were limitless. Scaring yourself would always be the scariest. Even a dragonslayer could be scared to death by his own shadow. A king who possessed everything could go insane from seeing himself in a mirror in the future where he was about to die. Usually, people who say you understand haven't even thought about it yet. I haven't thought about it yet, but since you've thought about it for me, the punishment will be all of the above. How about it? You're scamming me again. Alright then, complaining was useless in the face of power. Now, I had a reason that I couldn't fail no matter what. My impromptu suggestion hadn't come to a conclusion, so there was no answer to their original worries. How should they deal with the undead? The undead emperors hadn't arrived yet, and it was impossible to close the dimensional door. The true battle was only in its countdown. Would they be able to rush into the Bardi Empire and establish a frontline fortress? In that case, Aulus would probably laugh his head off at having so many free cannon fodder. He could only take things one step at a time. The Bardi Empire's request for peace should be able to be dealt with. Wouldn't agreeing to peace be the same as giving up on any reason to interfere? But if the Bardi Empire continued to chase after the Bardi Empire, wouldn't it cause the Bardi Empire to collapse sooner than it should? If the Bardi Empire collapsed, wouldn't the Mage country be the first to suffer the brunt of the Bardi Empire's destruction? Perhaps when the truth was revealed, some archmages with bad tempers would want nothing more than to immediately head out and kill that sly old fox. Unfortunately, the mags would need to pray for the Bardi Empire's stability for a long time to come so that they could at least fend off more calamities. The dragons had just sent a request for reinforcements. I'll discuss it later. This request was far too difficult. It was likely that the dragon world was in a complete mess right now. Any ordinary mage that participated in the battle between the giants and dragons would be committing suicide. When I returned to my little garden, I discovered that Halent, who had come to deliver the letter, had already left. He left. Are you joking? This morning, he even said that he was waiting for my reply. Dragon Knight Archduke Halent is busy with official business, so he said goodbye first. Since I'm here, I'll help him take his leave. The one who replied was the little girl Cher. Recently, she had been visiting me more and more often. Thanks to my hard work and repeated suicidal behavior, our relationship seemed to have improved. At the very least, we didn't have any problems communicating anymore. Yep, didn't all girls like gifts? That was why I kept giving her all sorts of small gifts. Expensive and large items were given to me in units. The police station was filled with a sea of flowers when I opened the door. Recently, the guards at the police station were all looking at me strangely, and then, before Cher could even react, I mysteriously gained several honorary titles of Demon Father. Even my subordinates were looking at me strangely. This had nothing to do with the daughter mentioned in Cher's letter. I simply wanted to get to know the local mags better. I also wanted to investigate what exactly happened back in the day and what that Evelyn wanted. That was why I simply sent her flowers every day and picked her up after work. I definitely didn't have any other intentions. I didn't know if Cher's opinion of me had changed, but at the very least, I was the one who helped her. Not only that, I had been doing my best to prevent the garden from being discovered by the police station. Heloise, can't you just be old or young? I had also been going to the police station to pick her up. This was mainly because those bastards had learned how to deal with the security here, making it even more difficult to catch, and I had been helping out with investigations less often. At the very least, she had been treating me more politely. She looked around as she said this. She seemed hesitant, as if she had something she wanted to say. Relax. Nobody can eavesdrop on me here. Everyone here is someone I trust. An urgent letter has arrived from the Bardi Empire. The undead have begun attacking the Bardi Empire. Night Rain City is in a state of emergency. Archduke Halent is rushing back to help. Chapter 316. There's a traitor among us. Otherwise, why would we always be on the defensive? Every step of the Mage country has been seen through. You're saying that there's a spy among the Truth Overseers? Who could it be? It's definitely that bastard Black Eye. Didn't you see how he's always so secretive during meetings? He doesn't even dare to show his face. Everyone else has been like this for more than 100 years. It's strange when it comes to you. That's even stranger. What's the situation that requires him to cover his face for so many years? Perhaps the blindfold he's wearing isn't a normal person's face. Perhaps he's not human at all. This was my logic. Although it was obvious that I was intentionally making things difficult for her, it wasn't completely unreasonable. However, Amala obviously didn't agree with me. Marguerite, who was sitting next to me, was calmly reading her book, while Adam snickered by her side. After that meeting, the situation in the Cloud Tower had changed. The Mystical Blade and several other organizations were all inclined to actively participate in dealing with this ever more chaotic situation. After the meeting, they naturally formed small political groups. I invited Amala to join us for a discussion. However, it seemed that she didn't agree with my judgment. She looked at me as if I was a scammer or a scoundrel. Then, that was right. I didn't have any evidence to begin with. Investigations were all just for show. Whether or not Black Eye was a spy was just a casual statement. I just wanted to find an excuse to make trouble for Black Eye. If Black Eye wasn't a spy, then all I had to do was apologize and say something along the lines of sorry for the mistake, but we still have something we need to make trouble for. Although it seemed like I was just chatting with Amala, from a certain standpoint, I was actually hoping to obtain her tacit agreement. After all, she wouldn't possibly help me with something like this. According to my plan, what we needed to do was quite simple. We just needed to think of a way to stall Black Eye while Sandro was doing something important. In that case, it would be enough to have Adam and Marguerite's help. Of course, it would be even better if he could take down Black Eye. However, putting aside the fact that it would be too difficult, killing a permanent member of the Truth Symposium right after joining this place would not be a good thing. Outsiders who were too aggressive would easily raise the vigilance of others, and if they were not careful, they would become public enemies. The specific implementation plan was even more straightforward. First, they would block Black Eye, then accuse him of being a spy while attacking him in public, provoking him and delaying him for as long as possible. What if he really was a spy? Hihi, I'm just saying. How could that be possible? It's not like I'm some kind of efficacious charlatan who can randomly point out that someone I don't like is a spy. How did you know I'm from the Tark Republic? Roland's sudden attack was effective. The magic acid that he had prepared beforehand not only melted away Black Eye's magical defenses, but it also melted away Black Eye's hood. All that was left beneath the hood was a familiar skull. There was no need for words to describe the soulfire flickering within. This was a top-level Lich. As for me, I had just retracted my index finger and was trying my best to maintain a calm expression. My earlier "there's only one truth, you're a spy," was so cool that even Black Eye believed that I had caught hold of his weakness, which caused me to instantly turn against him. How did you all know I was a spy? I shouldn't have any flaws at all. My fake identity is perfect. I even simulated my daily food intake and physical need. You can't laugh. You definitely can't laugh. I did my best to pretend to be serious, but my goal was to suppress my laughter. Otherwise, everyone would know that I had accidentally stumbled upon a spy. The old Lich had an expression of disbelief and astonishment. He still didn't know what had exposed his true identity. Behind him was Adam, who was so astonished that he even dropped his sword. This bastard knew from the very start that I was making things up, and he was also here to be my hired thug. You have the right to remain silent. If you refuse, everything you say can be used as evidence against you. Alright then, since my luck was quite good, let's continue playing. Since the detective had finished his lines, it was time for the police to take action. However, judging from the storm of negative energy behind Black Eye, it was obvious that he wasn't in the mood to slowly play with me. In that case, let's directly enter the trial. Law incantation, silence. All sound in the area was instantly silenced. For a mage of Black Eye's level, this never-before-seen spell would only last for an instant even if it was effective. However, that would be more than enough for us. This abnormal silence caused Black Eye to pause for a moment. This was an excellent opportunity to fight. How could the experienced Adam possibly miss out on such a good opportunity? After switching to the lightning element, Black Eye's overall power level decreased. However, his speed actually increased by several times over. When a semigod warrior managed to get close to a Lich, with the support of a saint and a saint teacher, as well as a professional troublemaker like me, it was obvious what the result would be. Several dozen seconds later, Black Eye's bones were all shattered. Black Eye collapsed far faster than anyone expected. The death penalty, the death penalty. The Truth Symposium that had just ended was urgently convened again. While the furious archmages were angrily denouncing this shameless traitor, I was also delighted to learn that Sandro's plan to rebel against Black Eye had successfully succeeded despite the fact that Sandro's traitor had been absent. Second senior brother had successfully become the acting leader of the Sword of Order, becoming the leader of the Sword of Order. A fake. Yep, a fake. However, no ordinary fake. Although Black Eye was an academic mage, he was still a true myth-ranked mage. Rather than saying that Black Eye wasn't Black Eye, it would be more accurate to say that there was no such person. The interrogation soon came to a conclusion. Mags had far too many ways to make someone reveal their deepest secrets. Even if Black Eye was already dead, he still wouldn't be able to hide the secrets of his soul. Marguerite, who was representing me in the Truth Symposium, also gave me the information that she had just received. After I forcefully joined the Truth Symposium, my identity seemed to have been cleared up somewhat. Even Amala seemed to have more trust in Marguerite now. Black Eye isn't an individual. He's an identity. He's an identity that the undead from the Tark Republic used to move about in this country. There are many amazing undead among them. Naturally, they have enough theses and research results to make Black Eye more and more famous. The Black Eye that we captured is nothing more than a substitute. Ha, a myth-ranked Lich as a substitute? How extravagant. Wait a moment, the only possibility that Black Eye can have such a powerful existence as a subordinate is an even higher level undead. That's the only possibility. Yep, that's the only possibility. That current Black Eye is someone you know. Asso. Only an undead emperor would be able to make such a vicious individual obediently serve as a substitute. So, does that mean that Black Eye has spent a considerable amount of time here? Perhaps the teacher Black Eye that we met back in the day is actually Asso himself, a main member of the Truth Symposium, the leader of the Sword of Order, the strongest mage organization in the Cloud Tower, is actually our enemy. That means that all of our previous plans were under Black Eye's nose. This is a direct slap in the face to the mags who pride themselves on their intelligence. You really should have gone to the Truth Symposium. When news of this spread, the archmages were furious. Teacher Amala even joked that even an undead emperor from the mortal plane is voluntarily learning from us and even participating in our Truth Symposium. Perhaps it's our honor to have worked together with us for so long. As she said this, Marguerite seemed to recall how furious the mags had been at the time, causing her to chuckle to herself. She's quite right, isn't she? One of the former undead emperors. How does it feel to meet your senior? Perhaps he studied in the Truth Symposium just like you did. I only nodded in agreement with Marguerite's words. This wasn't difficult to understand. Why couldn't undead sneak into the Truth Symposium to study? From a different standpoint, if I was still an undead who could choose where to hide, as long as I didn't have to worry about exposing my identity, hiding in a mage country would obviously be the best environment for me. Not only would I be able to do my own research in peace, I would also be able to communicate with other mags and even obtain some information on my enemy. Is there any other new information? It's so rare to catch such a high-level tongue. Right, the Truth Symposium wanted me to convey their thanks to you. As expected of that Roland. He was actually able to find such a well-hidden mole. Did you really come to such a conclusion based on the information you obtained? Was it information related to Asso's inheritance? Do you really think that Asso would do something so foolish? In that case, I'll just say that you guessed it. Marguerite nodded with certainty when she heard this. She then casually tossed me an old and tattered notebook with some records written in the undead language. I casually flipped to the last few pages and understood why the Truth Symposium was so displeased. They actually believed that I had discovered this information through investigation rather than by chance. I've already sent the information to His Majesty Asso. Those foolish old fellows still think that this is their world, but they don't know that we've already made preparations. The day that our species has been waiting for is near. The end of the living is coming. That idiot Andrew is actually working together with the other vice leaders to investigate my background. Damn it, could it be that my constant leaking of information has caused them to truly suspect me? Today, I saw that man. Yongye. As expected of a former undead emperor, as expected of the powerful individual who defeated undead Emperor Asso. We only glanced at each other, But Youngya's eyes were filled with hostility and wariness. Did he already discover something? The shadow guards brought me some information. Andrew and that Roland guy are secretly meeting. It would seem that it's not far before I'm exposed. I need to hurry and send out this new information. Alright then, from a certain standpoint, Youngya deserved his misfortune. He actually had such a thing on him. Hey! I suddenly paused as I flipped through the pages. There was actually a number at the bottom of every page in the notebook. If anyone else saw it, they would probably think that it was some random number. However, I, who had obtained Asso's inheritance, knew that it was a series of code words, as well as Asso's personal password. The Mage Tower is located at 376 Abo Street. What's this? Asso's personal laboratory. Chapter 317. There were many different types of mage towers. There were fortress towers that were specially prepared for battle. These towers had simple facilities and were usually shared. There were also research towers that were used by mags to live in. These towers were a mage's personal property and would often contain their entire life savings. But no matter what type of mage tower it was, they were all incredibly dangerous areas. Having one's own mage tower would be equivalent to having one's own world. Not only would one's combat strength greatly increase, all sorts of research would become much easier with the support of dimensional barriers, energy pools, and other expensive equipment. For ordinary mags, having their own mage tower could be considered a lifelong dream. But since it was a dream, most people would never be able to achieve it. The reason? Simply because it was too expensive. A large-scale energy pool that formed the energy cycle required tons of mithril and other precious magical metals to insulate it. A water elemental pool required a dimensional portal to maintain a normal state. Even a personal library that symbolized wisdom would be a shame if it didn't have at least 1,000 books. A single magical book would be enough to exchange for a shop. Even ordinary rich merchants and local domain lords wouldn't be able to afford a single room. Only the rich royalty of various countries would be able to afford it. The result of having a personal mage tower as their lifelong dream was just like how a salaryman would save up to buy a house. Every day, they would calculate how many square meters they could buy with their savings and future income, but they still couldn't make up for the high cost of living and the increasingly harsh reality of society. 3 years ago, their dream was to have 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms. Now, it became 2 bedrooms and 1 living room. Perhaps they would only be able to afford a 3-square-meter pigeon coop when it came time to pay for it. Of course, there were also easy ways to obtain a mage tower. One would be to trick a rich person into becoming a spendthrift. Find a rich boss and work for him or her as a personal magic consultant or something. Or, if you were powerful enough, you could even work for a certain country's royalty and become a seemingly decent court mage. Or, if you worked for the military's environmental protection department, then there would be a place for you in a mage tower that was part of a fortress's defenses. But no matter what you chose, the result would be that you would lose your freedom. Your research direction and daily routine would all be changed. Back when I was at the Ottoman Empire's underwater base, the rich high-level mage towers were far too enviable. Although the Borealis 7 turret-type mage towers weren't made out of any materials, they were more than enough to be used as amplification devices for mags. They weren't self-sufficient, so they could only be considered half-finished products. It would be impossible for them to be used for research. A private magus tower? I really want one. That's right, even I didn't have a mage tower. The main reason was that I didn't have much need for a mage tower. Undead magic's main focus was on raw materials. Even if I wanted to build a mage tower, it would be a soul-summoning tower. As for ice magic, cough cough, let's talk about something else. Actually, I have the most awesome super mage tower blueprints here. I strongly recommend the Cloud Island and Volcano Tower, but for you, even building a tower won't be of any help. Even if you use a large-scale calculator, it'll still be just 4 calculations. An elementary school student should just obediently use an abacus. Why didn't you say so earlier? I really do need it. I habitually ignored my system's sarcasm. Private magus towers with Cloud Island designs had long since disappeared in history. Mobile magus towers were just too awesome. Magus towers with volcano towers could absorb lava as an unlimited source of mana. They would even have bonus firepower. As long as the location was good, a single Magus tower with a single fire archmage would be able to easily deal with an entire country's main army. When it came to constructing Magus towers, the mage country's mage organization, the Seven-Colored Tower, was at the forefront of the mage country's technology. The Seven-Colored Tower was a paradise for elemental magic researchers, as well as an expert in researching Magus towers. Archmage Antonio even had a small Magus island that had been passed down from ancient times. Every time he drove it out, it would be incredibly flashy. Even dragons wouldn't dare to compete with it. His Magus tower was also incredibly expensive. It was said that Antonio was the poorest archmage out of all the other archmages. Even if you can't use it, you can sell it for money. Sure, a legendary-level Magus tower blueprint costs 50,000 fate points, and a blueprint for the core components starts at 10,000 fate points. Antonio's Magus tower blueprint. Semigod Magus tower, starting at 500,000 fate points. However, I feel that even if you buy it, you won't be able to sell it. After all, the raw material for it is a miniature fire cycle semi-material island. That's far too difficult to obtain. I didn't feel embarrassed in the slightest that my scheme had been exposed. Instead, I directly asked her to show me the exchange list. Magus tower-related technologies were either some archmage's personal treasures or magical secrets that had been lost to history. How could I possibly miss out on such an excellent opportunity? A mobile research residence with such flashy food, clothing, housing, and transportation was every single shut-in mage's ultimate dream. Why do you have such a function? Aren't the items you can exchange for ridiculously expensive luxury goods or those scammers that specialize in scamming people? New technologies of the same generation can always be exchanged for. Large amounts of research results will have less of an effect on the karma system. With the new technologies of the next generation, the old technologies of the previous generation will naturally have less of an effect, which will lower the price. 10 years ago, these technologies would have cost at least 3 million fate points. Now, you can even afford to exchange for these technologies. So, you understand. This time, my system wasn't intentionally scamming me. You understand? I really did understand now. So, since the system's list could be exchanged for this technology, it could only mean that a certain place had already used these technologies on a large scale. Was it a certain human country, or a visitor from another plane? No, this technology had existed in the past, and it was a local product. Only a super-rich species with a long history would be able to use such ancient technologies to create mage towers on a large scale. Are the elves the most likely? Their recent movements have indeed been quite strange. No, there are also those ancient artifacts that escaped from the garbage heaps of history. Perhaps they've brought with them past technological achievements. Anything is possible. But right now, the most important thing was to quickly browse through my system's exchange list and find what I wanted. If the price was suitable, I also wanted to build my own personal mage tower. This one, and this one. 120,000 fate points. Thank you. Are you kidding me? These are all common components of a mage tower. I'm only using them to research the technology. I haven't decided on the type of mage tower I want yet, nor have I bought any blueprints for the main structures. Why would they be so expensive? So, you're not buying them? I'm buying them. How could I possibly miss out on such an excellent opportunity? I grit my teeth and swiped on my system interface, emptying my wallet. I then didn't dare to look at any of the more attractive programs. You're not going to continue looking? There's even better programs. Me. If I don't look, I won't be tempted. If I'm not tempted, I won't buy them. I won't spend money as long as I don't go out. Do you think I'm an idiot? If I buy them again, I'll chop off my hand. I still have Asso's Mage Tower blueprints here. You're probably going there soon, aren't you? Are you sure you want to go to a Super S difficulty dungeon without opening a map? Say it again. Are you going to buy them or not? I'm an idiot. Can't I just chop off my hand? The three-colored tower was a mage tower model for Asso's personal mage tower on Ebo Street. This was the newest technology of the seven-colored tower. It was also a byproduct of the seven-colored tower's research on the nature of the elements and their pursuit of the ultimate product of mixing the elements. The seven-colored tower had 2 support tower spirits and 2 elemental pools. When an archmage provided sufficient support and control, it would be the equivalent of having 3 levels of mags simultaneously casting spells. Not only that, they wouldn't even be of the same element. Not only that, their mana came from the same source, and their mana wavelengths were similar. It was also possible to stack their mana on top of each other to cast powerful attack spells of multiple elements. The seven-colored tower only existed in legends. It was capable of stacking 4 different elemental spells, 1 Order Divine Art, and 1 Chaos Divine Art. This was one of the ultimate goals of the mage organization, the seven-colored tower. However, I knew that even as this world approached its end, the seven-colored tower had only managed to create a 4-colored tower. They hadn't even managed to fuse all the elemental spells together, not to mention the much more difficult Order and Chaos Divine Arts. The 3-colored tower was a classic battle-type mage tower. Its attack range was at least 10 or so street blocks around it. For a certain someone to build such a mage tower right in the heart of the Cloud Tower City, it was rather frightening if one thought about the reason and goal. And right now, as I stood in front of this mage tower that looked nothing more than a dilapidated bungalow, I was inwardly astonished at how perfect this illusion magic was. There were so many people walking to and fro on the street, but none of them stopped for even a second. Even their gazes were automatically averted. AXH. THF. LKK. I tested it with a few rune passwords that Asso often used. After a flash, the illusion disappeared, and a tall black mage tower appeared in front of us. The large door, which had gargoyle carvings on it, suddenly opened up, revealing a pitch-black interior that seemed like a black hole that devoured all life. Everyone on the street then ran away in fright. The uncle who owned a bakery next door looked at the new building that suddenly reached the clouds next to his bakery and directly dropped his freshly baked bread onto the ground. This feels like a death trap. From a certain standpoint, everyone's instincts were absolutely correct. Even I could sense that if I entered the tower just like that, I definitely wouldn't be able to come out. As a shut-in archmage, all of their food, shelter, and transportation were located in the mage tower. This meant that all of their research and collection items were stored within the mage tower. Even for a mage who was about to die, there were basically no good people like I have so many treasures that I haven't used up yet. It would be such a pity for me to die. I want to give back to society. Most mags were selfish. They had the mentality of I won't give them to you even if I don't need to keep them for storage, or I'll take my treasures and collection with me even if I go to hell. They would definitely use the highest level of skill to create their own defensive spell formations and various traps. Most traps would automatically activate even after the mage died and wasn't at home. Entering an unfamiliar mage tower without a map or guide would have far too low a chance of survival. Even if you were a semigod, a forceful teleportation trap could suddenly teleport you to some random elemental plane or vacuum. Even if you didn't die, it would still make you want to cry but have no tears. Then, you would have to spend several decades trying to find your way home. Although mage tower exploration missions were quite lucrative, ordinary adventurers wouldn't dare to accept them. It would be completely unimaginable if there weren't any fatal traps. And any high-level adventurers who accepted such missions would likely end up as cannon fodder. A mage tower's danger level was directly proportional to its master's power level. A saint-ranked mage's mage tower would be able to give semigods headaches. As for an undead emperor's mage tower, if I had any enemies here, I could simply sell this information to them. All I needed to do was hide the identity of the original owner of this mage tower. First team, enter. I stopped Adam, who was eager to try. I then had a group of summoned elemental creatures enter the mage tower, and then, there was no then. In less than a minute, the summoned elemental creatures' soul connections were cut off. Oh my, you're quite skilled. Second team, enter. I'm not going. Alright then, the silly cat rejected me. My magical pet actually refused to give me face. This was something that went against all mags' common sense. Although everyone else was already used to this, Cher, who had been invited along, had an expression of astonishment. It's enough for your clone to go. It won't affect your main body. Nonsense, of course it won't affect my main body. It's just that after being revived, all my children will have life and pain. They'll be transmitted to me at the instant of death. I don't want to repeatedly experience the feeling of death. I just sent 3 of my children into the Mage Tower. Do you know what it feels like to fall to your death from a height of more than 4,000 meters, be trampled to death, and be teleported to another dimension to starve to death? Then would you feel it if someone touched your children? I suddenly recalled something very similar to zombies. You can try. My children can grow teeth as well. I glared at each other. Neither of us wanted to back down. In the end, I used my ace card. You've been here for a while as well, right? If I use my magical pet contract to order you to hand over your Mage Tower. P2E, come at me. I'm not afraid. TSK, so your Mage Tower isn't there. Ah, there's a giant flying rat. Isn't that just a bat? I'm not a real cat, so I have no interest in such a thing. Also, do you really think such a foolish method of diverting my attention would work? You're just trying to throw me into the Mage Tower while I'm distracted. TMPH, I'm already used to this method. I've long since been seen through. Where did this white bat come from? The silly cat bared her fangs and brandished her claws, but she was still carried by the giant bat. She drew an arc in the air and instantly flew into the Mage Tower. Only her heart-wrenching screams remained in the air. Someone's abusing the cat. I turned around and glanced at the beast tamer who was currently asking for credit and nodded in satisfaction. Beifeng's little companion had once again accomplished something great. Hearing the silly cat's screams, the other Beifeng companions were all laughing and chatting as they watched the commotion. However, Cher, who was an outsider, was rather worried. She'll be fine, right? Relax. If the all-knowing Harlois can't deal with her, none of us will be able to. Besides, I'm confident in her. She'll be fine even if she detects all the traps. No, she won't fall before she takes revenge on me. As long as she sends her clones to scout the area, how could her main body possibly be injured? Roland, just wait for me to come out. You're going to teach me a lesson. This seemed to be the most appropriate way to describe the situation. Judging by how confident Harlois was, it seemed that there was indeed no need to worry. My lord, little cutie number 3 has returned. Lady Harlois is on the 3rd floor. Yep, we'll go in half an hour. Right, if the silly cat left any traces saying that it's absolutely safe, that place is definitely a trap. Relax, my lord. Even if you don't tell us, we all know. But please don't drag us into your battles. People will die. Chapter 318. Right now, if Roland returned to the Forest of Dreams on the other side of the strait, he probably wouldn't be able to recognize this place anymore. That was because the Forest of Dreams had changed far too much. The trees that reached the clouds were taller and taller, and there were more and more strangely shaped green plants. However, the greatest change wasn't due to nature. I obtained another mutated zombie today. 10 justice points. My luck's not bad, but I think there's only 3 lesser fruits of strength left this month. If I don't hurry up, I won't be able to exchange for them in time, and I'll have to wait until next month. Only 3 left. When I saw yesterday, there were only 5 left. It's only the 10th now. How did it end so quickly? Yep, the ferocious bear squadron returned with a great harvest. They exchanged for lesser fruits of strength for their captain and main shield warrior. I'm so envious. Damn it, I need to hurry up. I'm still 200 justice points short. Otherwise, I'll have to wait until next month. If one had to find some differences from 2 months ago, the most obvious would be that this place was now extremely populated. This was no longer a gathering place for the wood spirits. When flyers were posted in the adventurer associations of the various countries, even the frightening undead calamity didn't scare these adventurers who were willing to die for wealth. The temporary houses were already filled with people, and tents had been set up in the forest. Every day, hundreds or even thousands of people would enter this forest by sea. Seeing how popular it was, some adventurers who had come earlier even set up taverns and inns with the help of the local residents and started doing business. The mercenary and adventurer guilds also started their daily business. The blacksmith shop and the alchemy laboratory had also been completed and were about to be put to use. After Night Rain City was attacked by the undead, the adventurers of the Forest of Dreams received the Bardi Empire's recognition in order to reduce the pressure on the front lines. Killing the undead here would not only earn justice points, but they would also receive rewards from the Bardi officials. 1 job, 2 jobs, 2 incomes. The Forest of Dreams also provided miraculous treasures that could increase one's basic stats. This attracted countless powerful individuals to come here to earn justice points. The undead were quite frustrated as well. It was indeed difficult for them to face pressure from 2 fronts at the same time. However, attacking the Forest of Dreams in the west had already been proven to be impossible. So, they could only choose to strengthen their attack on Night Rain City, which was protected by the Dragon Knight. Night Rain City was the main battlefield, after all. The moment that the battle finally erupted, the Bardi citizens, who had long since been prepared for this, began their internal cleansing. The undead in the capital city were directly wiped out. Both sides had completely shed all pretense of cordiality. Asso's absence caused the Tark Republic to lose contact with and control over the higher-ups of the Bardi Empire. In the end, the Tark Republic could only fight head-on. The regular army of the undead army, which had been in existence for tens of thousands of years, wasn't something that the contract heroes could deal with. The contract heroes who barely managed to probe the undead army had to drag their wounded and corpses back with them. However, the scattered undead recruits who had just finished their teleportation were the targets for the adventurers to test the waters against. The warriors who had formed large groups or even armies could also try to eat up a small number of undead. These hunters who went berserk for the sake of spoils did indeed create a lot of trouble for the undead. Not only did they draw away a lot of the undead's forces, but they also greatly reduced the pressure on the front lines of Night Rain City. Many undead also benefited greatly from this. Of course, not everyone was the lucky one. What happened to them? They're so pitiful. Sure, don't talk about it here. The Eyes of Justice adventurer team just ran into a skeleton general riding a bone dragon yesterday. Only 2 of them managed to escape. That's their leader, the Gold Holy Knight Ostia, right? How pitiful. On a temporary stall, a young human warrior who had lost an arm was hugging a blonde female's head and sobbing. Behind him was a female workat thief who had lost her right eye and right leg. She was tied to the back of her only companion. Her only remaining eye was numb. It was obvious that she had lost all will to fight. Her face, which was slightly better, even seemed to have lost the will to live. Blood was still dripping from their wounds, which were bandaged with white cloth. The path they took back to Night Rain City was covered in blood. The Eyes of Justice is finished. The famous leader of the Holy Knight, Ostia, had died in battle. Not even the corpses of the main members had returned. The legendary mercenary group of White Catalan had come to an end today. The remaining 2 rookies were completely unable to carry this heavy battle flag. Not to mention, they were so heavily injured that they couldn't continue in this line of work anymore. However, the young warrior, Carter, didn't think so. He seemed to have cried enough. He wiped away his tears, bit on a bandage, and bandaged his left arm. His eyes, which were still red and swollen, were like raging flames. His eyes contained both the determination for revenge and the heavy responsibility. He handed his leader's severed head to his companion and walked towards the hall where the mission issuer was. He seemed to be intending to report his mission, but someone stopped him. With your injuries, you probably won't be able to go on any more missions. Waiting to starve to death isn't a solution. Why don't you just join us? Some mercenary groups were recruiting people at this time. It seemed as if they were sending charcoal in a snowstorm. However, in the eyes of those who understood the situation, it wasn't because they cherished talent. Instead, it was because they had ill intentions. Are those fellows planning on taking this opportunity to swallow up the Eyes of Justice mercenary group? Profiting from the dead? How disgusting. Even if the mercenary group was almost completely annihilated, it didn't mean that this mercenary group didn't have any wealth left. Its mercenary rank and reputation were its greatest wealth. Its glorious history and mission records were the hard criteria to gain the trust of its clients. Not to mention these non-material items, many mercenary groups would have a deposit with the guild for completing missions. They would also store some weapons, equipment, and items. These were all accumulated by a mercenary group over countless years. Don't be impulsive. That's the Ottoman Solok mercenary group. Or perhaps I should call it a bandit group. They don't have a good reputation. It seems that they want to throw away their past reputation and change their shell. The old mercenary stopped his companion, who was hoping to fight for justice. This was obviously against the rules of the mercenary group, and it was quite unkind. However, seeing that the other party had 40 to 50 strong and well-armed people, even if he was dissatisfied, he didn't dare to do anything. However, they didn't dare. There was someone who dared. In fact, this was her duty. Please step aside. Her icy childish voice caused everyone to pause in surprise. Her bright red hair caused everyone to move to the sides, as if she was a hero from the legends who parted the seas. This seemingly weak and young wood spirit girl had killed a mercenary who had committed robbery and murder here 3 days ago. She had a calm expression as she sliced off the mercenary's flesh, asked him how he felt, collected his blood, and then watched him die. Her calm expression left a deep impression on everyone. Bloody Rose Samantha, the first leader of the wood spirits, had already left a deep enough impression on outsiders. At the very least, these visitors knew that this seemingly gentle species was definitely not to be trifled with. But right now, this wood spirit girl had a calm expression as she stood there. The Solok mercenary group members hurriedly moved aside. These past few days' encounters had made all the outsiders realize who the true boss of this forest was. Those unlucky fellows who had been teasing these little fellows had used their actions to show what it meant to have a death wish. Nobody wanted to be stuck several hundred meters in the air for 3 days and 3 nights without being able to go up or down. Samantha's eyes flashed with praise as she looked at the young one-armed mercenary who was still resolutely standing there without a shred of hesitation or fear in his eyes. However, she simply asked him a question calmly. "How's the patrolling mission in the D2 area?" "The mission has been completed. There's a newly built undead scouting outpost hidden there. There are 2 squads of black-armored knight soldiers, as well as an undead lord-level skeleton general. They even have a bone dragon with them. Leader Ostia said that their goal is to scout out and control the paths we use to enter the forest, so that they can intercept and kill us first." Everyone felt that it was a pity when they heard this. They could only say that the Eye of Justice's luck was terrible. It was just a daily patrolling mission, yet they just so happened to run into an undead lord who had come here to set up a scouting outpost. No wonder they were almost completely annihilated. But fortunately, 2 of them managed to escape and spread the news. Well done. 100 justice points will be transferred to your account. The promised resources will also be delivered to you. How's your leader? Carter turned around and glanced at the beautiful golden-haired head. He was biting his lip so hard that blood was dripping from his mouth. He tightened his grip on the trial's eye flag. "From now on, I'm the leader of the Eye of Justice. Honorable Lady Samantha, bronze-ranked Holy Knight Carter, at your service." However, Samantha shook her head. Ostia is the one who accepted this mission. The resources and justice points can only be delivered through her. But Carter had an anxious expression. However, the smart people around him already saw through the truth. "I never expected that the wood spirits, who appear so cute on the outside, are actually so cunning." She intends to go back on her word. However, to everyone's surprise, Samantha had no intention of stopping the conversation. She even directly pointed at the human head and spoke. "I'll directly talk to her." Samantha pointed with her finger, causing a collapsing white mist to float out of the human head. In the Forest of Dreams, if a soul wanted to return to the Gui Ming River, it would require the approval of the world's will. The temporary obsession and broken body of a heroic soul that died in battle would make it so that it was unwilling to leave. Obsession would also cause a person's soul to sink into insanity. This soul was already dead and was in a state of confusion. It was obvious that it was impossible to communicate with her. If this continued, it was highly likely that she would transform into an undead creature. There's no way to talk about this. As Samantha spoke in a soft voice, a flower suddenly rose up and protected the white mist soul. Several seconds later, a green glow covered the entire area. The cycle of life and death was restarted. Then, a nostalgic voice spoke out from the flower. "Hey, didn't I die, leader?" The cat thief who had been in despair suddenly became excited and struggled to crawl over. Carter's expression was filled with astonishment as well. Tears of joy poured out of his eyes. How is this possible? However, when the flower dissipated, what remained wasn't that familiar tall beauty. Instead, it was a young blonde girl. Her pointy ears and glowing eyes indicated her species, a wood spirit. Transforming into a wood spirit requires 50,000 justice points. You don't have enough. Ostia, since you're now one of my tribe, I'll allow you to temporarily owe me. Sister Ostia. The overjoyed cat girl had already thrown herself into the blonde girl's arms. Blood and tears were flowing out of her wounds. Kite, who was standing on the side, also had an excited expression. The surrounding audience was indeed astonished. Resurrection was something that went against the cycle of reincarnation. They had never heard of such a thing before. Snap. Samantha snapped her fingers, causing a dark green glow to envelop the two injured warriors' broken hands and wounds. When the light faded, the new limbs were as white as jade, and the crippled warriors were restored to their peak condition. The two injured warriors were so excited that they didn't even notice that their wounds had healed after witnessing their leader, whom they admired so much, being revived with a different identity. Seeing this scene, Samantha knew that it was impossible to talk about anything else right now. She ignored the astonishment and disbelief around her as she turned around and left. Soon, the options of using the power of the forest to heal the crippled and transform into a wood spirit's body appeared on the wood spirits exchange list. Healing the crippled only required a large amount of justice points, but the requirements were obviously too much. 50,000 justice points is one thing, but they're even asking for a female who hasn't done any evil deeds in the past. That's too much. What does that mean by being recognized by the wood spirits? That means that the wood spirits are the ones who have the final say. Look, there's even a small line of text below. If a male doesn't mind living a different lifestyle, it's possible. However, in order to prevent any moral confusion, there will be an additional magical rune on their face that indicates their previous gender. Even though the requirements were so harsh, many powerful individuals still went crazy over this. News that wood spirits had a silver bloodline had long since spread. Many powerful individuals who desired to climb to the peak were even willing to start all over again. There were also many powerful individuals who were nearing the end of their lifespans that wanted this opportunity. Of course, the fact that the wood spirits didn't have any male characteristics also scared away many normal individuals. Fine, it had to be admitted that there were many abnormal individuals who wanted this opportunity. Thank you so much. In the future, as long as you have any requests, we're willing to serve you faithfully. However, Samantha shook her head at Ostia's gratitude. I didn't do anything for you to thank me for. Ostia expressionlessly sent off the first new member of the wood spirits who still retained their past memories and personality. However, she mysteriously recalled what that man had told her before he left. You're asking me how to manage those outsiders. If they're players, then it's enough for the wood spirits to be good NPCs. It's safe and rewarding. Just a little bit of effort will be enough for them to fight to the death for you. You don't understand. Yep, the most important part of being an NPC is being neutral. That means that you need to maintain a certain distance from those outsiders and treat them fairly and equally. You can't do that. I didn't ask you to truly be emotionless. You just have to pretend to be emotionless on the surface. Samantha, you're born with a paralyzed face that never smiles, so you're the most suitable for this job. When the time comes, you'll naturally be the most suitable person to deal with matters. Although judging from her current reaction, what that man had said was correct, Samantha mysteriously felt displeased. She turned around and looked at the mirror on the wall, doing her best to squeeze out a smile. However, after trying for half a minute, she discovered that her face seemed to have stiffened. She stuck her left and right index fingers into her cheeks and forcefully pulled on them, forcing a smile onto her face. Smile. Smile. The red-haired girl in the mirror had a smile on her face. Meanwhile, another face that suddenly appeared, that of modest Jill of the three virtues, was filled with despair and disbelief, as if the world was about to end. Sister, are you under some sort of curse? If you're not feeling well, you should have told us earlier. All right then, the rest of the time was just like any other day. The farce of a cold-faced older sister chasing after a single-celled younger sister replayed itself. Chapter 319. Asso's definitely a lunatic. I agree. I agree. My companions agreed with my words, and behind us was indeed a rolling metal ball. What an old-fashioned trap. He's definitely an ancient artifact from the previous century. We ran as fast as we could while insulting each other. Finally, we found a corner in the wall where we hid and allowed the metal ball to pass. Why didn't we shatter it? Damn it, it was actually made out of adamantite. Not to mention shattering it, just being grazed by it would be the same as being hit by a train. What was a train? Alright then, to describe it in a magical fantasy world, it would be like being hit in the head by a +12 battering ram. Even if you were as lucky as a cockroach, you would only be left with cockroaches or cockroaches. He's definitely a pervert with a dark heart. That's why he would set up such damned traps. That mage would transform his own residence into a trap. I did my best to drag down the silly cat that was still biting on my head while being chased by the metal ball as I cursed him. Serves him right that nobody loves him. How is this a mage tower? This is obviously a pranking competition. When we first arrived, the first 3 floors were quite smooth. But the further we went, the stranger things became. Please decipher the formula written in Draconic within 20 seconds and obtain the correct number. If you exceed the time limit, the trap will be activated. It was nothing more than a 6-digit mathematical formula and password deciphering. Mags had high requirements for logical thinking and knowledge, so it was easy to understand. Moreover, we had the demon Professor Harlois with us. Such a high-level problem wouldn't be difficult for us. After you obtain the correct number, please sing it in the same tone as the climax of the 3rd act of the Oh, Beautiful Sun opera. Repeat it 3 times. No more than 3 trills are allowed, and no more than 2 mistakes are allowed. Damn, Asso's an opera lover? Can you not be so ridiculous? 16. From a certain standpoint, the mage tower spirits were also clones of the mags. This voice that was filled with malice made it seem as if someone was waiting to watch a show, which made me feel quite displeased. 3429, 420, 4242, hurry up and sing. Didn't you obtain his inheritance? Harlois quickly dismissed the answer, but when she hurriedly urged me to sing, I could tell that her anxiousness was all fake. Her eyes were filled with delight, as if she was waiting to watch a good show. A magical inheritance isn't a musical inheritance, right? You expect me to sing opera? Screw you. How do you know my sister is a famous singer? We didn't even get to say a few words when the host tower spirit arrived. 13, 1, 0. What about the middle count? Can you not be so deceitful? Before the silly cat and I could finish retorting at the same time, the malicious-filled tower spirit appeared again. Are you complaining about the middle count? At present, the shortest successful time is 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Even if I give you 2 minutes, you won't be able to sing it. Alright then, at the very least, the game's creator knew that this question would be far too difficult. Or, perhaps I should say that he had no intention of answering it at all. Before we could even finish our idle chatter, the only thing that poured down upon us after the mechanism was activated was an unbearable icy water. But what came after that was even more frightening. A ballet for 2 people? And we have to jump on a bamboo pole? Does tying a cat to a boot count? 3 shameful past events that can make one cry out of sympathy? Not to mention 3, I can even find 30. What? You want me to perform it in a small theater? Dream on. Go ahead and activate the mechanism. A cross-dressing competition? Only men are allowed to participate. Don't even think about it. Come, what's the mechanism this time? A tongue twister mixed with multiple languages? Let me do it. No matter if it's the ancient elven language, dragon language, or dwarf language, I have no problem with it. What? A tongue twister mixed with 32 different dialects. Qui hua, serve the pickled cabbage? F***ck. As we walked down this path without any sense of shame, we resolved ourselves to destroy this tower spirit no matter what. By the way, is it really that difficult to enter a mage tower in a normal situation? No, in a normal situation, it's either an invader's annihilation mode, or a friend's visit mode. It's obvious that we've activated some strange mechanism. Everyone looked towards me as they seemed to recall the keyword that I had read out when we first entered. Oh, so that string of words is to activate the Mage Tower's inheritance test. Silly cat, don't bite me. Alright then, my act of pretending didn't work. Everyone looked at me with an expression that said it's all your fault. The silly cat was becoming more and more skilled at biting me. Well, this is a rare opportunity. Since there's a password, it would be great if we could obtain the complete tower. At first, I thought that it would only be a test on magic knowledge and techniques, or at most a test on one's personality. Since we had Harlois and I on our side, there shouldn't be much difficulty. However, nobody expected that the test would be so difficult. Since there was a possibility that we could obtain this tower, I didn't want to use the method of destroying everything in the tower, so I could only slowly play along. It's probably a test of adaptability. But since it's a successor test, it shouldn't be something so annoying. After the test of intelligence, there should be a test of strength. Before I even finished speaking, the door to the room in front of me opened up. 2 3-meter-tall metal golems appeared, buzzing and vibrating. Behind them, the fire elemental pool was also activated, and numerous fire elemental creatures walked out. Judging from my companion's passionate expressions, fine then, I decided to shut up. In order to test your concentration, please sing my son as you fight. Otherwise, you'll be infinitely spawning fire elemental creatures. Are you done yet? I'm definitely going to tear you apart. Threatening the examiners and increasing the difficulty of the test. Also, I have a name. My previous master gave me the name Meteor. Judging from the 2 other doors that suddenly opened up and the fire elemental creatures behind them, it seemed that this Mage Tower Spirit Meteor wasn't satisfied with our answers. Mage Tower spirits were the result of Mag's research on artificial souls. They were typically the Mag's most trusted creatures in their own Mage Towers. They would act as caretakers, research assistants, and even support souls for casting large-scale magic spells. Some Mags would even raise their Mage Tower spirits as their own children or disciples. The quality of a Mage Tower spirit would directly affect the Mage Tower's effectiveness. Judging from my past experience, the great majority of Mage Tower spirits were just like mechanical answering machines. They would only know a single command and a single action. The higher level a Mage Tower spirit was, the more human-like it would be. And if a Mage Tower spirit had its own will and personality, then it would definitely be a top-level Mage Tower spirit. This Mage Tower spirit named Meteor was obviously an extremely top-level Mage Tower spirit. It seemed that it had a rather lively personality. Fine, I should say that it was full of mischief. It actually started cheering us on as it watched us fight. You must reset it. Suddenly, I seemed to understand why it was becoming more and more difficult for us to advance. Since it was a top-level Mage Tower spirit with its own will and personality, if we kept cursing its biological father as we advanced, it would naturally want to kill us. It would seem that I've accidentally caused trouble again. I took a deep breath and casually pulled the silly cat off my head. I shook my right hand, and a pitch-black magic sword appeared in my right hand. For the Lich King, I casually shouted the most appropriate battle cry. The pitch-black magic sword gave off a dim shadow, and the sword's blade seemed as transparent as thin ice. This magic sword had already been activated. Countless shadows appeared on the ground, transforming the entire room into a ghostly realm. Countless shadows took form on the walls, and even elemental creatures that didn't fear instinctively retreated. This wasn't any magic at all. It was merely the sound of a magic sword being unsheathed. This was the power of a top-level weapon. But why did this scene make me feel like I was the antagonist? Damn it, Harlois, you leveled up again. Could it be that you changed your job class to Frostmown? What's Frostmown? Isn't my alias Ice Calamity? Did you find another sword behind my back? The greatest tragedy in life was that no one would understand one's complaints. Not only that, Harlois sounded just like a heartbroken wife who discovered that her husband was having an affair after hearing her husband divulge his lover's name in his sleep. Just what was the meaning of Harlois' tone and words? After awakening to the consciousness of a pet cat, did Harlois really intend to awaken to the consciousness of a weapon? It's all because of you. Stop wasting time. I'm coming. If elemental creatures still had the ability to judge their opponent's strength, then these two gigantic metal magic statues would be pure killing machines. Their intelligence wasn't high, and they only had one command and one action. However, this represented their unstoppable will to fight until they were completely reduced to spare parts. Asterisk clang. Asterisk my magic sword viciously clashed with my iron fists. However, my expectation of being able to slice through metal like it was mud didn't happen. On the contrary, a tremendous force directly sent me flying, and a powerful rebound spread from my right hand to my entire body. I hurriedly took 2 steps back and stomped on the ground to barely stabilize myself. I almost ended up rolling on the ground like a gourd or a rookie's signature sword. How is this possible? My current strength isn't any weaker than a dragon's. Look at that arm. You're so damn rich. Beneath the surface of my magic sword was a dark gold color unique to adamantine. This was actually an unprecedented metal magic statue. This time, even Harlois wanted to call me a wastrel and a damn rich person. Magic statues were the mag's most commonly used personal guards. It wasn't difficult to create low-level magic statues. All one had to do was assemble some spare parts into a body, and then use magical power to activate it so that the low-level artificial soul within it could move. However, whether or not a magic statue would be difficult to deal with would depend on the materials of its spare parts. Flesh and blood magic statues were notoriously weak. However, the materials used to create them were easy to obtain, and they were one of the favorites of undead mags. They would be able to create a pile of flesh and blood magic statues. If they were weak individually, they could make up for it with numbers. If they wanted quality, they could even consider combining flesh and blood magic statues together to create a gigantic magic statue. Stone magic statues were slightly stronger, but clay magic statues had the advantage of not being afraid of physical damage. Sand magic statues were also the natural enemies of physical attack job classes like warriors. Stone magic statues and flesh and blood magic statues were cannon fodder that could be easily mass-produced. Metal magic statues were the main warriors. Since magic statues had bodies that could be activated, that was to say, the materials used were their flesh and blood. If the flesh and blood were strong and dense, then the magic statues would naturally have powerful bodies. Iron magic statues were the perfect warriors that were incredibly difficult to deal with. They had tremendous strength, quick reflexes, iron bones, and were immune to mind magic. Mags would often add some small tricks to their magic statues, such as lightning, fireballs, hidden weapons, oil sprays, poisonous mist, and so on. Even without those fatal traps, the bodies of metal magic statues would become even stronger and their power level would increase exponentially. Of course, the cost of creating metal magic statues would increase as well. Metal golems required blacksmiths to use the best materials to create their parts. Enchanting the weakest magic-conducting metal could drain a top-level archmage dry, so it would take at least several months to polish. An ordinary metal golem would cost more than 10,000 gold coins, and high-level golems were not for sale. It was said that back in the immemorial Elven Empire, the Gold Elf royalty used to have mithril magic statues as their guards. Mithril magic statues were existences that were basically immune to magic. They were the natural enemies of mags, and they were also viewed as the symbol of rich people. But right now, the one before us was even more ridiculous. Even the Gold Elf princess wanted to call it rich people. Damn, adamantite. That's an adamantite magic statue. He's really rich. Coating a weapon with adamantite would increase the price of that weapon by more than 100 times. But at the same time, its weight would increase by at least 3 times. Adamantite didn't have any special properties other than its hardness. Of course, in the eyes of most people, This adamantite's hardness was already at the level of being indestructible. Adamantite was incredibly expensive, so expensive that it was worth at least 100 times its weight in gold. When I thought about how the two magic statues before me were actually made out of adamantite, I couldn't help but sigh at the fact that the building's quality wasn't bad at all. I couldn't help but curse in my heart. P2E, how rich. If I sold these two magic statues, I'd be able to build an entire mage tower. But while I could sigh, the emotionless magic statues wouldn't stop. The higher the quality of the magic statue, the stronger it would be. This 3-meter-tall adamantite magic statue could only be considered a small one in the magic statue family, but its brute strength was capable of sending a dragon flying. Its small size also gave it high agility and speed. The magic runes on its feet even gave it the ability to increase its speed twice. Although its outer appearance was pitch black and inconspicuous, it was definitely the deadliest weapon of all. CHMPH, Avatar 1 and Avatar 2 were the previous Tower Master's proudest creations. If you don't defeat them, don't even think about obtaining our recognition. The Mage Tower Spirit Meteor would take advantage of this opportunity to strike me while I was down. But I was indeed in a bad situation as I was surrounded on both sides by these two magic statues. I once again regretted destroying my tower, or at least my future tower, because I was worried about the brat Adam. I didn't invite the gold medal meat shield to help me. Asterisk clang clang clang. Asterisk 4 arms, 4 legs, and iron fists rained down upon me like a storm. I was beaten so badly that I could only crouch on the ground and defend. Large cracks had already appeared on the Ice Calamity magic sword that Harlois had transformed into, and the recoil from the sword's attacks caused my feet to sink into the ground. The magic statue's attacks were just that simple and violent. They were purely based on strength and speed. Their punches and kicks were like children fighting, lacking any beauty. However, the adamantite magic statue's punches and kicks made me feel like the entire world was shaking. I'm about to shatter. Use the Ice Calamity. The hibernation chill is taking too long to take effect. Indeed, it didn't matter if the enemy had high physical resistance or magic resistance, as long as they were a product of this world, they would be able to enter a state of absolute zero and be eternally frozen. No. Don't worry about keeping it a secret at a time like this. We need to use our trump cards when they're needed. Absolutely not. Why? If I'm frozen by the hibernation chill, I won't be able to unfreeze them. That means I won't be able to sell these 2 gold mountains for any money, you bastard who values money more than your life. If you want to die, go ahead. Don't drag me down with you. Chapter 320. Roland missed. Strength 32, plus 10, Agility 22, Constitution 22, Intelligence 30, Will 21, Charm 19. Talent abilities: War Angel form, Sinful Demon form, Sword of Order, Titan body, Shadow feet, Divine Child, Barrier of Chaos. Basic job class: Level 60 Order Knight, Level 60 Chaos Witch King, Level 10 4 Elemental Swordcasters. Advanced job class: Level 4 Lord of Winter, self-created. System evaluation: An excellent meat shield capable of directly facing off against an immemorial dragon. A gold-ranked novice who can rival legend-ranked warriors. If you really want to find a dragon of time to prove me wrong, that's fine too. System notification: Congratulations, you have succeeded. The two before you are even more ferocious at melee combat than an immemorial dragon. But aren't you forgetting something? You're a mage. Compared to my time in the Northlands, my system interface hadn't changed much. My stats were still extremely average. The only difference was that I had taken a small step forward in my advanced job class. Asso's gift not only gave me a large amount of magical knowledge, but also gave me the buff of +1 in willpower and +1 in intelligence. Willpower didn't really matter anymore. After all, that was only important to Asso. I didn't need a higher willpower to strengthen my defense against mental magic. Intelligence was a mage's main stat, and it was also related to the accuracy and precision of magical research. This buff of +1 in intelligence allowed me to break through the threshold of 30 points in intelligence. This was a huge gain. This was also the first stat that I had ever reached level 30. However, Perhaps there were still some conditions that I hadn't fulfilled yet, so the talent ability to break through in intelligence hadn't been bestowed upon me. Although I really wanted to complain, when I thought about how Harloise's frighteningly high 40 points in intelligence didn't awaken any powerful abilities, I felt that my 30 points in intelligence didn't have any qualitative changes, so I felt that it was quite fair. Harloise was burdened by me, her magical pet's master. However, I couldn't explain myself. I knew what the reason was. I was a sly person who would run away from battles whenever I had the chance. I would do my best to avoid battles that were too difficult, dangerous, or meaningless. But sometimes, it was better to be a bit foolish. The protagonists of hot-blooded legends were usually hot-blooded idiots. However, this wasn't some nonsense about idiots having dumb luck or being favored by the heavens. It was simply that single-celled organisms didn't fear challenges or failure. The more trouble they caused and the more battles they fought, the faster they would grow. As long as they stuck to their original intentions and accumulated plenty of combat experience, their growth rate would basically be the same as cheating. Fine then, I was talking about that brat Adam. Sometimes, it was truly enviable to not think about anything at all. I could faintly sense that the next breakthrough would be incredibly important to me. I had also reached the basic requirements for breaking through, but I always felt like I was lacking something. Every bit of effort was equal to the reward. Even the best gemstones would need to be polished in order to shine. Perhaps my bloodline contained limitless power, but I also needed to be tempered to shine. From the moment that I left the underground, I had probably experienced a tough battle with Amdirokan. I seemed to be having quite a good time, but a great battle was imminent. If I didn't push myself to the brink of death, how could the hidden potential in my body possibly grow explosively in the future? I also know that I need more actual combat in order to rapidly grow stronger. Fighting on the brink of death is the best training. But isn't it a bit foolish to constantly be on the brink of death for no reason? Perhaps it was just my personality. Even if I knew that this was an old problem of mine, I couldn't change it. I would always think too much. As a warrior, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to think too much. Sometimes, I really envy Adam, Cavendish, and the others. They don't care about anything and only want to do whatever they want. Their growth rate is just like cheating. I've done all sorts of schemes to obtain all sorts of resources and support, but I'm only barely able to keep up with them. However, there was one thing that I shared with these two hot-blooded idiots. If I really had to fight, I would. Fighting is all about courage. I casually tossed aside the cracked calamity magic sword. In front of such an opponent, such a weak sword would be useless. Amdirokan's wall of size. A huge myth-ranked shield covered my arm. The carving of Amdirokan on the shield seemed to be roaring. This shield didn't have any amazing abilities, but it helped stabilize my trembling arm. Immovable mountain, the wielder's stamina is increased by 2. If the wielder also wears the semigod equipment Earth Raw Bracers, as long as the wielder stands on the ground, the wielder will be able to transfer some of the damage to the ground and will never be knocked down. This seemed like a good ability, but it was actually just an ability to take hits. It didn't have the physical damage reduction that top-level defensive equipment should have. It would hurt as much as it hurt, and if a vital part of my body was hit, I would still die. This was doubtlessly a very useless ability. Even if I could use the set stats, I would still need the semigod equipment Earth Raw Bracers as a supplement. I couldn't even leave the ground, which was quite troublesome. But right now, this was the most suitable ability for me. Come, let's see who falls first. The War Angel form's greatest advantage was its ability to fly. In order to use the special abilities of these two pieces of equipment, I could only keep my feet on the ground. This is Sparta. I'll show you Roland's determination. F***CK, don't hit my face. I ignored the dark circles under my eyes caused by my initial mistake. I took a deep breath and observed my opponent's movements. I lowered my head, bent over, and took a step back to dodge that heavy punch. If I couldn't dodge it, I would use my shield to block it and take the opportunity to counterattack. Clang. The gigantic demon statue had no emotions. It didn't hesitate, and it didn't waver. Every attack was as powerful as a mountain, and every attack was as accurate as a needle. Even if blood and flesh flew everywhere, it still didn't have any mercy or killing intent. It simply attacked and defended at its own pace, as if it was a secret machine that was completing its own work. Meanwhile, its opponent was a man made of flesh, but his performance was even more like an Iron Man than an Iron Man. Did I break my arm? I put on a layer of ice to numb the pain and continued. My right eye felt like it was blind. And my left eye? My left eye was gone as well, but I still had sharp spatial perception. Did my internal organs receive heavy damage from the powerful recoil? I was fine. I spat out some blood and continued. Faster, faster. This isn't difficult at all. It's just a simple mechanical movement. Think back to your past combat experience. How many opponents have you met who are more cunning and difficult to deal with? My eyes were already hazy, but the entire spatial layout appeared in my mind. The trajectory of that heavy punch was so obvious that I could sense it even if I closed my eyes. Faster, faster. The limits of my physical body and stamina. It's still too early for me to reach that level compared to the desperate situations I faced in the past. Although I couldn't even stand steadily, my footsteps were perfectly fine. Since I couldn't move faster, then I would simplify and reorganize all of my movements. I would use the smallest movement to obtain the best effect. I would take a step forward, bend my body, and suddenly jump backwards. All I needed to do was dodge the punch. Faster, faster. I'm not a coward who only knows how to take a beating. Gradually, I seemed to get used to my opponent's rhythm. I switched from total defense to total offense. I went from defense to offense. I went from defense to offense, and now I had a balance between offense and defense. Now that I was starting to switch from offense to defense, the hibernation chill effect on my arm was finally starting to take effect, gradually tilting the scales in my favor. Hibernation chill. This effect is added to any ice element attack. Every attack will reduce the opponent's speed by 1%. This effect can be stacked. It's impossible to avoid. However, after stacking is stopped, the effect will automatically disappear after 10 minutes. As my attacks accumulated, the hibernation chill also slowed down the demon golem's speed. Faster, faster. At the very least, I have to be faster than this iron lump. Yep, this was a battle of time and willpower. Would the demon golem stop moving first, or would I be beaten to death? Faster, even faster. Due to the loss of blood, I was now too weak. Even though I had already predicted my opponent's movements, even though his heavy punches were only moving at half speed, I no longer had the strength to move. Just as I expected that my head would explode like a walnut in the next instant, something unexpected suddenly occurred. Asterisk clang. Asterisk the entire world seemed to pause for an instant. A certain bell suddenly rang, and then everything returned to normal. However, something was completely different. What I saw now was a completely different world. Congratulations for activating your natural talent ability. I didn't have the time to look at my system's notification or my inevitable venomous tongue. My iron fists were still as deadly as ever. I could only follow my instincts and fight. However, I discovered to my astonishment that my opponent's speed and punches were both much slower than before. It was as if I have a chance to win. Faster, faster. My final bit of stamina brought me victory. Finally, before I completely lost consciousness, my two demon golems were almost completely unable to move. They could only slowly move their gigantic bodies. The battles around me had already concluded. All the elemental creatures had been killed. This pitiful battle caused my companions to only focus on the physical body of the gladiator. They believed that he would win in the end, just like how he always did in the past. And the truth was just as I expected. Just like how he always did in the past, he did what he said he would. Stinky pervert, your dirty bodily fluids have entered my body. I'm being polluted. I'm so uncomfortable, so uncomfortable. I'm going to break. I'm going to break. Hurry and pull it out. Heloise's moans echoed in the empty room. Everyone looked at me with a strange gaze, as if I was doing something heinous and unforgivable. Don't intentionally misunderstand. I'm only using your clone as a band-aid to stop the bleeding. What bodily fluids? Don't make things up. I'm not making things up. Isn't blood a bodily fluid? It feels so strange to have someone else's blood flowing through your own body, only you would tear off another person's body and use it as a bandage. You're going too far. You're such a demon. You'll be able to reproduce endlessly anyway. You're basically no different from the lowest level slimes. Hey, perhaps you'll be able to develop some other uses apart from bandages, such as silly cat underwear. Don't bite me. I'm really going to die if you keep biting me. Harloisa's mouth twitched in the end as she joked around with me. It seems that you've already obtained what you wanted. I couldn't help but tear up as I looked at the notification on my system that my hard work had finally paid off. Don't misunderstand, they weren't tears of happiness. They were tears of embarrassment from not knowing how to respond. Did I succeed in making a breakthrough while on the brink of death? I succeeded. The new racial talents on my system's interface indicated that I had indeed made a breakthrough, but why did I make a breakthrough in stamina and agility? I'm a mage. My 30 intelligence points should have been for a breakthrough in intelligence, right? Just now, you were a mage. I thought it was either a barbarian duel or a warrior monk's masochistic asceticism. When I thought about it, I instantly felt awkward. I indeed didn't seem like a mage at all. Even if I had obtained an opportunity to make a breakthrough, it might not have been an opportunity to become a mage. That was a perfect knight duel. You're the perfect example of a knight's spirit. That unyielding willpower, that impenetrable defense. Then, teacher, what's wrong with you? Cohen still didn't realize that he had dealt a powerful blow to his teacher as he watched me become more and more depressed. However, that wasn't the worst part. The battle had already ended. According to the Tower Master's design, we had already completed the trial. These 2 adamantine magic statues would be the final bosses, but, what? You want him to be the new Tower Master? Dream on. Didn't you see what just happened? That guy isn't an intelligent mage at all. He's clearly just a short-haired monkey who hasn't even gotten to know his own limits yet. If I had to choose him, I might as well have chosen a gnome. At the very least, gnomes would know to run away when they see the adamantine magic statues. This was the Tower Spirit Meteor's synthesized voice, which was quite similar to the name of the other twin tower spirit of the 3-colored tower garden. Alright then, I won't comment on how strange it sounded to have these 2 names together. But right now, one half of the 3-colored tower's management authority was rejecting a new master. This was doubtlessly a super troublesome matter. Not only that, the demon of mischief's Tower Spirit Meteor that we were familiar with was actually speaking up for me. No matter what, he completed the trial. According to the rules, he should become the new Tower Master. Although he didn't use his mage intelligence in battle, he was basically a Manchurian who only thought with his knees. He discovered that the adamantine magic statues didn't have any lightning resistance. They would slow down if they were struck by lightning. He also didn't discover that there was a magical rune on the back of the magic statue's waist that could control him. That's his weak spot. He also didn't discover any system notification that the fire elemental pool had an incantation to control the magic statues. Fine then, he was indeed unreliable. How about we try again? Chapter 321. One of the 3-colored tower's special traits was that it had 2 elemental pools and 2 tower spirits. When fully activated, it could be viewed as 3 archmages. The Tower Spirit Meteor was a combat-type tower spirit that directly controlled the fire elemental pool, spell boosters, magic colossus storage, and other combat facilities. Meteor's personality was designed to be flexible and cunning. He was a classic battle mage. The Tower Spirit Garden was a support and research type of tower spirit. She was connected to the library, the water elemental pool, the laboratory, and other research facilities. In order to aid in research, she would remind mags of possible mistakes. She had a large amount of magical, natural, and societal knowledge in her memory. Her personality was also quite cautious and conservative. She could even be called old-fashioned. Tower spirits that were absolutely loyal were mags' most trusted assistants. Naturally, the smarter the assistant, the better. There were several ancient tower spirits that had been passed down from ancient times that were even more intelligent than ordinary humans. Sometimes, overly free and intelligent tower spirits would cause trouble for their master, especially for their master's successor. Artificial souls weren't devoid of emotions. It was completely understandable that an artifact would trust their creator. Loyalty that was ingrained in one's bones could become personal worship. It would be difficult for outsiders to understand the deep relationship between a tower spirit and a mage. I definitely wasn't insinuating that Otaku and his only old friend, the computer, had a close and trusting relationship that a third party couldn't understand. I don't want a new master. I don't want my old master's treasures to fall into the hands of an outsider, even if this was the original master's request. That was why the most dangerous situation when exploring a tattered mage tower would be if the tower spirit was still functional. That would be basically the equivalent of dealing with an entire army under the control of a single commander. For the next successor of a mage tower, a tower spirit that wasn't very loyal would obviously be a huge problem. That was why the first thing they did after obtaining control over a mage tower was to reset the tower spirit's personality and memories. Although that would require them to start training the tower spirit all over again, it was still better than dropping the ball at a critical moment. And since the tower spirit had its own will, this was no different from wiping out the tower spirit's will. This naturally worsened the tension between the tower spirit and its successor. Perhaps the tower spirit wouldn't be able to directly rebel against the new master under the orders of the original master, but it would be unavoidable for them to do evil within the rules. Compared to Garden, who directly expressed her dissatisfaction, the seemingly kind Meteor's method was actually quite similar. If a normal mage had been given such a torturous trial, they would have long since exploded in anger or directly fought against the trial. But, if someone actually dared to openly refuse the trial and fight against the trial, the mage tower spirits would have achieved their goal. They would be able to use the same method they used to deal with invaders to wipe us out. No matter who won in the end, the mage tower genie would no longer have a new master. Even if they managed to break through the mage tower's defenses, there would still be time for the mage tower's vital parts to self-destruct. Hence, if one wanted to obtain this Magus tower in its entirety, the only way to deal with it was to play along with them and let them do whatever they wanted. Once they used up all the freedom within their authority, they would naturally pass this so-called test. If I make a powerful undead creature out of a dragon's remains, just how many types can I make? Also, how should I make the best use of the materials? What are the important things to take care of? These were Garden's additional questions for the Mage Tower Spirits test. However, they were filled with evil intentions. Indeed, this was a test of magical knowledge. However, an ordinary mage would definitely be unable to answer this question. After all, undead mags were still a minority in the Cloud Tower. And even if an undead mage specifically came to the Cloud Tower, that undead mage wouldn't be a top-level undead mage, nor would they be skilled in dealing with dragon corpses. And, the people before me were all quite young and alive. It was unlikely that they would be highly skilled in undead magic. And since Asso was a hidden undead mage, it was perfectly reasonable for him to use undead magic to test his successor. Garden used her own method to choose the questions that she believed to be the least likely to be answered correctly. She probably saw me use holy light just now, so she probably thinks that I'm a divine arts mage who also studies holy light. However, it was evident that Garden's cleverness had made her own. If she really used some sort of specialized magical knowledge test, I might not be able to deal with it since I was the one who broke all the records for failing magic classes back in the day. Fine then, since Harlois was here, and with the level of knowledge she displayed in the previous test, it wouldn't be too much of a mistake for Garden to test me on the unpopular topic of undead magic. Could it be that I had unknowingly achieved the dream of every examinee, to bring a teacher with me to take the test? Cough, cough, getting back to the main topic, even if it was an undead magic test, there was really no need for me to ask my teacher for help. If it's a dragon's corpse, the most common ones are bone dragons, corpse dragons, and dragon souls. These are indeed the best choices for making use of such a rare material, but they might not be the best choice. Since it's a matter of dealing with a dragon's corpse, then I obviously need to consider the material's characteristics. Now that I mentioned this, I started to miss the past. Back in the day, in order to obtain some dragon-grade materials, I had to go through the Dragon Graveyard and Dragon Valley. The feeling of being chased by the guardians of the Dragon Graveyard was truly nostalgic. If it's a white dragon, I'll unhesitatingly make it into a bone dragon. Not only is it because white dragons didn't have much intelligence when they were alive, I don't expect them to have much intelligence or spellcasting abilities. Ice-type corpses can also strengthen a bone dragon's ice dragon breath. But if it's a silver dragon, gold dragon, or black dragon of a certain age, and if the dragon soul is still relatively complete, then I can consider using soul-summoning magic to create dragon liches, dragon graveyard guardians, and other undead mags. Although the success rate isn't high, if it succeeds, then their combat strength will be off the charts. Please answer me in detail. What I want you to tell me is how many undead creatures and how many species can you create if I give you a single dragon? I was still intending to continue talking about the theoretical classification and choices of undead dragons, but my teacher seemed to realize that he had found a problem, so he changed the topic to a test of my application skills. If the corpse is complete, the entire dragon skeleton can be made into a bone dragon. If there's a dragon soul, it can be made into a ghost dragon. However, if the corpse isn't complete, the success rate will be very low. Part of the dragon's wings can be used to create a dragon skin gargoyle's outer shell. Dragon teeth can be ground off to create dragon tooth soldiers. Ribs number 7, 9, and 11, which won't affect the corpse's integrity, can be used to create a giant bone beast. The internal organs are excellent. Just the dragon heart alone is enough to create a top-level abomination. All sorts of dragon parts can be used to effectively increase the basic stats of zombies and stitched monsters. None of these can be wasted. As for rotting dragon blood, it's best to create undead slimes. Undead mags were so poor that their usage rate of materials was ridiculous. If I gave them a single dragon, they would be able to create a powerful army. Just how poor are you? Most of these things were created by you after you scrounged up all sorts of resources. I didn't teach you any of this back in the day. Harloy's comment seemed to have inadvertently revealed something. Judging from the Mage Tower spirit's silence, it seemed that my answer had far exceeded her expectations. It would seem that Asso and Harloy's were both wealthy individuals who didn't need to scrounge up research materials and funds. How would they know how difficult it was to start from scratch? I hadn't even explained how to avoid the tomb guardians and dig up the tomb yet. Back in the day, my Grave Robbers Chronicles, Dragon Grave chapter, sold incredibly well. If the dragon eye isn't damaged, you can ask a demon warlock to help you create the highest level Abyss Watcher, the type that will forever be invisible. It's super practical, but it's quite painful to give them half of the dragon eye. That's why you can consider killing the other demon warlocks. After all, 99% of demon warlocks are troublesome people who have committed countless crimes. Killing them will be the best way to help the common people. As for dragon scales, the heart, the back of the head, and other vital parts can be used to create dragon scale shields. They're light and sturdy, and won't affect spellcasting. They're basically the most popular type for battle mags. As for the other ordinary dragon scales, ask a leathersmith or alchemist to enchant them into protective gear. Dragon skin armor and so on are super popular, but don't ever tell anyone that they were dug up, or the price will be lowered. Remember to paint them first. That way, the disgusting smell can be left behind so that customers can be sure that they're real dragon skin and dragon scales. Oh, right. Green dragon nails contain poison, while blue dragon nails contain electricity. They can also be used to create enchanted daggers. In that case, you'll need to ask a blacksmith for help. I recommend a dwarf blacksmith in the 7th district of Cable City. Their craftsmanship is truly excellent. Their secret enchantment technique can create cursed black bone daggers, which are quite powerful. It's just that the owner of the shop is quite greedy. He's asking for 50,000 gold coins as an OEM fee. However, you can use your identity as an undead mage to threaten to kill his entire family. That way, you'll get a 40% discount. If you continue threatening to expose him for creating cursed items, he'll confiscate all of his assets. That way, he'll give you a 10% discount. By the way, even though I'm supposed to take care of that guy's business every time I pass by, Why does he look at me like I'm his enemy? Alright then, I seemed to have accidentally said too much. Everyone around me fell silent. Cher's expression towards me had changed from the respect I received from the previous battle to one that said, as expected of a super dangerous individual, I must be careful. Why did I know so much? She said it out loud. Could it be that there was a problem with my plan to raise a beautiful girl? My daughter had entered a rebellious phase where she disliked her middle-aged father so quickly. You're the one who doesn't. By the way, you're already middle-aged, so what am I? Old. Hello, Grandma. Goodbye, Grandma. Alright then, I was already used to having a silly cat hanging over my head and constantly dripping blood. I could just ignore her. What was I talking about just now? The greatest advantage of creating undead creatures is that you can try them over and over again. It's normal to fail. The materials are second-hand to begin with, so it doesn't matter if you reuse them. The only thing you need to pay attention to when creating dragon undead creatures is. I recalled my past experiences and came to a conclusion. As expected, that was the only thing I needed to pay attention to. Make sure you don't let the dragons see you. Otherwise, those narrow-minded lizards will come charging at you with their saliva, dragon breath. P2E, didn't I just dig up 7 dragon graves? Was it really necessary to hunt me down for 3 years? I'm doing this for the sake of creating new materials. I'm doing this for the sake of truth and knowledge. I'm the righteous one. Right after I finished speaking, the staircase leading to a higher level opened up. The tower spirits seemed to have come to an agreement as well. Perhaps you'll become an even more amazing undead mage than Master Asso. Not perhaps. It's certain. When I touched the control center of the mage tower, I felt as if my consciousness had entered the clouds. The entire structure of the mage tower appeared before me. This was a 3-dimensional diagram of everything that I had just obtained. And then, cold sweat began dripping down my back. Salo's crystal? How could such a thing exist? Salo wasn't some magical creature. Rather, he was an archmage from the immemorial generation. The word crystal was only an adjective. It wasn't some magical creature's core or secretion. It was a completely man-made object. Salo's man-made magic core wasn't fundamentally different from a titan's heart or an energy core. The only special characteristic about Salo's magic core was that it was much more powerful. Just how powerful was it? In a technological world, it would probably be enough to pay for a city's electricity for 3 or 4 years. At the very least, the creator of Salo's magic core had used it to power a floating city. That's right, a floating city, a large-scale city with several million residents, not a floating tower in the clouds. Salo's magic core was quite stable in my previous world, but would cause major trouble if something went wrong. If a Salo's crystal was activated in the wrong way, it would cause a familiar giant mushroom cloud to appear in the sky. Of course, it wasn't that the creator of Salo's crystal hadn't thought about using it to develop weapons. However, there had always been a small problem, a weapon that couldn't guarantee the user's survival, so nobody dared to use it to begin with. Activating a Salo's crystal required a legend-ranked archmage to inject a sufficient amount of mana into it through a special method. The explosion radius of the Salo's crystal far surpassed that of any teleportation spell. It was basically guaranteed that the user would die. Not to mention, Salo's crystal wasn't a necessity. After all, there were still forbidden spells in this world. However, if a Salo's crystal was developed into a weapon, it would have an advantage that forbidden spells couldn't compare to. It could be used as soon as it was activated. There wouldn't be a long casting time, and there wouldn't be any intense magical waves that would be announced to the entire world. If a Salo's crystal had been used as an energy source for a mage tower, I wouldn't have been so surprised. However, this Salo's crystal just happened to be found on a gnome cannon. That cannon was aimed at the Truth Symposium's tower of 10,000 mags, which was located 2 streets away. If the undead and the mage country started a war, and all the Truth Symposium mags were summoned for a ritual, and then a Salo's crystal suddenly exploded, I once again gained a new understanding of Asso. It was likely that he wasn't here just for personal reasons. He was most likely on guard against the mags from the very start. The gnome cannon wasn't the most important part. After all, as long as this Salos crystal was detonated, the entire city would be within range of the explosion. However, the closer one was to the center of the explosion, the less time the mags would have to react, and the fewer archmages would be able to escape. And if Asso had left some sort of message for Black Eye, then a legend-ranked Lich would likely be able to kill more than 70% of all archmages in the mage country. No, considering that Liches could store their phylacteries far away, it was likely that they wouldn't even need to use them. Perhaps the current Black Eye was the backup detonator. I carefully put away the Salos crystal and focused on the other two crystals in the control room. One was white, and the other was red. Both were about half the height of a person, and I could faintly hear a human's voice echoing within. This was the true form of the Mage Tower spirits. The stronger the Mage Tower spirit, the larger the crystal, and the more memories and knowledge stored within it. I also had a Mage Tower spirit like this back in Sulphur Mountain City. However, it was only capable of controlling a library, so its abilities couldn't compare to these two Mage Tower spirits. Its core was also only the size of a palm, and it didn't seem very human-like. Right now, as long as I touched the control panel again, I would be able to reformat these two Mage Tower spirits into their original forms. However, I didn't intend to do so. Forget about what happened in the past. Just follow me from now on. Yes, the Mage Tower Spirit Meteor Garden is willing to serve you. Really? Then let's start with a little song. I'll accompany you to watch a meteor shower land on Earth. Chapter 322. After the new master was confirmed, the three-colored tower's radiance expanded to the point where it could be seen from several streets nearby. The light cleansed the entire Mage Tower from top to bottom, including the stargazing platform, divination room, library, arcane garden, magic golem storage, mutated creature research lab, mystical creature dungeon, summoning room, elemental pool, servant area, and so on. As more and more rooms lit up on the map, my will reached every corner of the tower. Even though I was only touching the control center, my vision was able to jump between every floor of the Mage Tower. As long as I wanted to, my commands and voice could be transmitted to any location. The 17th floor of the main tower and the 12th floor of the two auxiliary towers have all been self-inspected. The 3rd floor of the main tower and the 7th floor of the 2nd auxiliary tower must be repaired. The other floors are in good condition. The energy pools have all been activated, and the magic golems will complete their self-inspection. They will begin cleaning and repairing the Mage Tower. It is estimated that after 3 days of comprehensive maintenance, more than 90% of the floors will be ready for daily use. The Tower Spirit Garden's voice echoed in my ears. Asso was indeed an old mage with a great background. It seemed that the dormant three-colored tower was in excellent condition. It would be ready to be used again after some cleaning. The magic golem warehouse was now open. Soon, those incredibly strong and tireless giants would walk out and become the best freeporters and cleaners. At my command, the summoning room was already summoning mags who would listen to my commands. Those magical creatures from the other world were diligent and smart. They only needed to pay a certain amount of mana regularly, and they would be the best servants for the mags. If it weren't for the fact that they could only survive in the Mage Tower, where the mana was concentrated, the mags wouldn't even need other human servants. Master Roland, the library has been activated. Your pet cat is requesting to enter. Do you approve? No wonder she disappeared in the blink of an eye. She's never been so hardworking when she's working. Toss her into the water elemental pool. Let her enter after she cleans up and cleans up. The silly cat angrily rebuked me through our mental connection. Just as the steward garden finished her own self-inspection report, the head of security Meteor also finished his inspection. Due to years of disrepair and many other reasons, including the test we just went through, some defensive spells and magic traps have lost their effectiveness. The Mage Tower's defensive capabilities are only at 47% of its peak. I've already prepared a list of supplies. But, considering that the Cloud Tower was still relatively safe for the time being, I decided to put this list of zeros aside for now. Of course, the most important thing was that I had other plans for the Mage Tower. The three-colored tower's core twin tower spirit support system is working well, and its mana reserves are excellent. Should I try? No, I'm a decent person, I won't ask you out. The consequences are too severe for me to bear. Although the three-colored tower spirit meteor seemed to be joking, I now had yet another ace up my sleeve since I could still use the three-colored tower's core forbidden spell. Oh right, this is for you. First, list out the funds and materials. If you have all the materials, start the transformation. The blueprint for the mobile cloud tower? Isn't it already lost? That's right, this was the mage tower design that I had chosen, the cloud tower type mage tower. This was also how the mage city was named. However, the Archmage's cloud tower was only a city, while my cloud tower was a mega mage tower that could travel through the clouds and solidify the surrounding water vapor into a tangible territory. I wouldn't be able to use a fixed cannon tower more than a few times in my lifetime, and it would be a waste to leave the battle-type three-colored tower in a safe city like this. I was destined to have endless troubles in the future, and a mobile mage tower was the best choice for me. I had already obtained the technology to create the cloud tower. Although the various materials were difficult to find, I would one day be able to collect them all. The biggest problem was a stable energy source. If I wanted the mage tower to float in the air for a long period of time, it would be impossible for it to be used on the battlefield. In that case, I would need to store up enough energy to fly for at least 2 months, which would naturally consume an astronomical amount of energy. This was originally the most difficult problem to solve. I had originally planned to find a group of 4 elemental swordcasters and other magic job classes to work for me as manpower batteries. However, this problem was solved far more easily than I had expected. Since the Salos crystal could even carry a floating city, a cloud tower wouldn't be a problem at all. Of course, just looking at the resources and funds required to construct the cloud tower made me feel dizzy. Not to mention, I wasn't intending to simply copy the cloud tower. Instead, I intended to learn the technology thoroughly and then modify it onto the three-colored tower, while simultaneously retaining the advantages of both mage towers. Although this sounded like wishful thinking, since the cloud tower spirit didn't directly reject my proposal, it should be possible. Although it'll be quite difficult, it's not completely impossible. Yep. After a while, I'll help you all level up, and I'll also introduce a new friend, 007. With his addition, your knowledge will at least double. With the knowledge of 2 undead emperors, you'll no longer be the three-colored tower's twin tower spirits, but the 3 wise ones. The cloud tower needed to control the wind elemental energy in its surroundings, so a built-in wind elemental pool was necessary. In that case, a supporting tower spirit would also be necessary. If I didn't intend to remove the water elemental pool and fire elemental pool for simple modifications, then I would need to add a new tower spirit. It would be far too much of a waste to leave the cloud tower spirit in my hometown to rust. Forget about leaving my memories underground, but all the knowledge I'd obtained over the past 300 years of traveling around the world could be added to the cloud tower's knowledge reserves. Yep, although theoretically speaking, the cloud tower spirit would obey the new master's control, it was just like how a new general manager would often appear in a company with a new boss. It was completely understandable that a completely loyal subordinate would appear in the new boss. The 3 wise ones. That sounds excellent. That'll be our collective name from now on. From now on, not only did I finally have a proper cloud tower, the Great Industrial Party also had a proper research center. Previously, it would have been possible to borrow other mags' laboratories for ordinary magical research, or to rent other mags' shops for engineering and alchemy research. However, this would have been fine for ordinary mags, but for emblematic truths level mags, it would be quite unsightly for them to do this for so long. They would basically be nothing more than a shell company filled with bad assets. They wouldn't even have a stable headquarters. Of course, reputation wasn't the most important issue. Just like how the various equipment in the cloud tower would help with scientific research, many magical research wouldn't be possible without the magical equipment and special rooms in the cloud tower. For example, the abnormal creature research room would be able to evolve 10 times faster than normal, and most of the mutations would be beneficial. It would be especially easy to breed new species. Not only would the summoning room's spatial structure be suitable for dimensional summoning, the walls would also be engraved with spatial, control, contract, and other magic arrays. This would make it easier for the summoner to control the summoned. Even if the summoner summoned a hell dragon, they could treat it like an inferno lizard. The most direct way to increase efficiency would be through the simplest of experiments. In the Cloud Tower, a simple command would be able to have the Cloud Tower spirit prepare a table for you, set up your experiment equipment, and place your experiment materials on the table. The Cloud Tower spirit would also record the process and results of the experiment. If you made a mistake, you could even use the Cloud Tower spirit's recorded memories to review the mistake. This would greatly reduce the research time, allowing mags to avoid wasting large amounts of time and energy on trivial matters, and speeding up the cycle of the next experiment. And Thorn Garden was developing new technologies and products every day. It was time to find a suitable laboratory for those overly energetic engineers and alchemists to build an explosive room, indestructible, to test the power of spells. This would be quite suitable for the energetic gnome engineers to use as a research room, explosion room. Thorn Garden wouldn't have to worry about being complained that it was too noisy or that it would be blown up into the sky one day. Of course, it was still doubtful whether or not this modification would succeed and how long it would take. It would also require a tremendous amount of magical materials that were priceless, so I could only take things slowly. But right now, I had even more important things to do. How is it? What did the archmages say? The moment I left the three-colored tower, I sent the information about the Salos crystal to the archmages. I also sent the Cloud Tower spirit's memories of Asso personally installing the destruction cannon. Of course, I also sent the Salos crystal as evidence. Cohen acted as my messenger, so he also brought the archmages' reactions and feedback. Some people immediately went berserk and wanted to fight the undead to the death. Most mags were quite calm, but when their own lives were in danger, nobody would be able to remain calm. Their calmness is actually quite strange. It's likely that they're just hiding their anger in their hearts. They're already furious at the undead. Chapter 323. It's already been 3 days, and there's still no official reaction. It seems that things have gotten out of hand this time. The Mage Parliament's reaction was quite calm, to the point that it was rather abnormal. But if one thought about it, this was actually a sign of extreme anger. This was just like when two countries had a conflict. If the losing side made a statement of dissatisfaction, condemnation, or protest, that meant that the losing side didn't intend to take any actual actions to get back at the other side. It was just a show of face. If the Mage Parliament said that it was reserving the right to take further action, it meant that the Mage Parliament wanted to do something. But the most dangerous thing would be to not say anything. As long as it's necessary, the mags can endure humiliation. But right now, there's no need for that. Then there were only two possibilities. Either the Mage Parliament couldn't afford to offend the Mage Parliament and decided to pretend that nothing had happened, or the Mage Parliament intended to take revenge, silently and viciously. Considering the current situation of the mags, it was 99% likely that it was the latter. The grudges between the two sides are already quite deep. The Mage Country's forbidden spell ruined the Undead Emperor's plans to invade Ike, and the Undead also schemed to kill the feared archmages in one fell swoop. Not to mention the still unconscious Amelia, there's also you. From a certain standpoint, you're the one who caused the situation to deteriorate to such an extent and forced Asso to his death. You're also currently in the Mage Country. You're definitely the number one person they want to kill the most. Thank you for reminding me, you jinx. Right, how does the water elemental pool taste? Didn't you already taste it? The tea you drank this morning had my bathwater in it. Fart. Many pet lovers had probably experienced the awkwardness of having a pet show off its prey to them. What was even more awkward was that these pet lovers would share their prey with their master, such as secretly adding rats and cockroaches to their master's food. Alright then, this silly cat was doing this on purpose. I was going to teach her a good lesson so that she wouldn't feed me even more than usual in the future. Don't run. I'm going to hang you on top of the Mage Tower to dry you. As usual, the human and cat chased after each other. The next step of the plan was already underway. From a certain standpoint, mags were indeed the most extravagant of all. The top-level research facilities were only used to create basic spell models. The dimensional door to the water elemental plane was only used to summon a few water elemental servants. Most of the facilities were unused. My subordinates were delighted to be able to use the Mage Tower's top-level research facilities for their own research. I'm trying to equip the golem with power armor and external weapons, so that we can solve the flaw of the golem's single attack method. How stupid. Didn't you notice that the biggest weakness of the golems is their slow movement speed? I plan to install the iron horses driving wheels on them. This will greatly increase their mobility. In that case, why don't we install a something or? Flying golems are so cool, and they can even carry people as mount. Coins. Stop bullshitting. That thing isn't reliable at all right now. There's no way to adjust its power at all. Either the lift is too high, or it can't fly. If the lift is too low, it'll be fine, but if the lift is too high, it'll be a torture machine. The head of the golem will be lifted into the sky and the body will be left on the ground. Have you forgotten the unfortunate straw test subject? What does what or mean? There was another story behind this. Back when I was trying to develop flying engineering tools, I recalled the propeller planes from another world. But since I was once a liberal arts student, I was unable to explain the principles behind it. However, there was one small toy that I knew about, the bamboo dragonfly. I casually made a bamboo dragonfly toy out of a piece of wood, and then tossed it to the dwarfs who were skilled in mechanical engineering so that they could discuss how to turn the principles into practical objects. Then, they asked me what it was. They obviously didn't understand what bamboo dragonfly was, so I casually said that it was something like a propeller. However, the dwarfs didn't hear what I said, and instead took what or as the official name. And so, what or and what or spread far and wide. By the time I discovered that something was wrong, it had already become the official name of the golem, and it was impossible to change it even if I wanted to. It could be expected that after traditional golems were equipped with all sorts of accessories, they would be unafraid of death and capable of anything. They would also be equipped with all sorts of dangerous firearms and heavy armor. Just how terrifying would they become? For some reason, I suddenly recalled the muscular naked man who shouted, "I'll be back." Oftentimes, the intelligence of the natives of another world would be no less than that of an earthling from another dimension. All I could do was give them a suggestion and a possibility, and they would often give me a result that exceeded my expectations. Magical engineering was such a miraculous creation. When technology and magic met, the original technology would explosively undergo a qualitative change. Nobody could predict what would happen next, but it was foreseeable that it would definitely change this world that was dominated by magical civilizations. At the very least, under my control, the development of magical engineering was destined to surpass history. Beastman warriors in mobile armor, elven rangers on motorcycles, dwarfs and gnomes who didn't have particularly strong bodies. History had already reached a certain turning point. How's the research on the Salos crystal going? It's probably a top-level creation from Halitdom's Halitdom generation. Little Dimmy, do you have any clues? Little Dimmy said that it'll be quite difficult, but it's not completely impossible. But no matter what, the current environment is completely different from ancient times. It's impossible to find the original Salos crystal, but it's possible to find a smaller version with only a fraction of its power. That's good to hear. Tell him not to be in such a rush and to make it a medium priority. That Salos crystal is far too dangerous. I don't want to wake up one day to find myself in the sky along with my base. Little Dimmy was becoming more and more amazing. As my head engineer, he was basically a bottomless pit of engineering. He was always able to surprise me. During the past 2 days, I had proposed a new project, the development of a new type of colossus. The ancient civilization Halitdom was also known as the Colossus civilization. Their Colossus technology was something to look forward to. I just didn't know how much of it Little Dimmy would be able to use. As I had more and more subordinates under me, there were now specialists in all sorts of fields. It was no longer appropriate to have a loose employment relationship between a domain lord and a mage's personal consultant. Companies, departments, and project teams from another world were now proven to be excellent choices. By the way, I should mention that the current person in charge of my alchemy department was Ingo Bayar. However, the person in charge was actually the second-in-command alchemist Olivia, who was becoming more and more capable. Not only was she able to fully utilize her natural talents in history, but most importantly, she was able to understand and coordinate with the other engineers, blacksmiths, and enchanters. Although she wasn't even 20 yet, she was becoming more and more like a big sister in charge of a project team. Currently, the most important projects for me, such as improving my mobile armor and researching Olivia's magic box, were all given to her to handle. With her around, at least the alchemy and engineering teams under her wouldn't start fighting each other. Of course, she also complained about how creating Olivia's magic box and enchantment armor had given her a large amount of engineering and enchanting knowledge. She was now able to work as an enchanter and engineer, but she was getting further and further away from her dream of becoming a great alchemist. However, her alchemy teacher Ingo secretly told me that the effects of Olivia's alchemy potions were becoming stronger and stranger. For example, the long-haired underwear thief who had been committing crimes in the Cloud Tower was actually a wild monkey who had consumed a powerful hair growth potion. Olivia's potion had simultaneously activated heat, hair growth, height increase, berserk, intelligence increase, and many other effects, turning him into a long-haired gorilla who sexually harassed people everywhere. For the sake of world peace, I should have her place her talents in a safer place. I still want to live for a few more years. These were the exact words of Ingo, who had been constantly creating explosives. Since that troublemaker felt that his own disciple was a huge problem, his back and face were covered in cold sweat as he said this. It seemed that he had been tormented by his own genius disciple. Right, since her potions are so powerful, why don't we have her concoct a potion for Beifeng? Perhaps that will make him more obedient. After all, he's already beyond saving. It's impossible for him to become any worse. Aren't you afraid that it'll have the opposite effect and that a mega Beifeng will appear? Perhaps he'll awaken to a new hobby, just like that experimental monkey. I thought back to that male long-haired gorilla who went around stealing old men's underwear. If Beifeng also became like that, it was my turn to break out in cold sweat. Just thinking about it made me feel despair. Let's talk about it later. If that really happens, the end of the world might arrive earlier than expected. Suddenly, the gnome seemed to have thought of something frightening as he revealed a terrified expression filled with despair. Recently, Beifeng has been treating Olivia to meals all the time. Perhaps he wants her to concoct a potion for him. That can't be. Does he think that he can still be saved? I don't know if he can be saved or not. Perhaps he wants to give the potion to his companion. Just as we were exchanging glances, we heard a cry for help outside the window. Ah, a monster. An ancient monster movie was currently playing out on the streets. Refugees were screaming in fear as a gigantic black beast was currently fighting against a mage from the city guard. For some reason, this gigantic beast seemed rather familiar. I adjusted my view and discovered that it was a gorilla that was about as tall as a mage tower. This gorilla was currently happily playing with a doll in its hands. However, this doll seemed rather familiar. It actually had dragon horns and black scales. Is that Beifeng? Isn't that the experimental monkey from before? He evolved again. Who's that? I don't recognize him. That's right, we don't recognize him. Cough. When I thought about the trouble that would follow, I decided to ignore the great beauty who was struggling in Adamantium's hands. Let's get back to the main topic. Now that the Great Industrial Party had a headquarters and research center, a large number of researchers, a storehouse to sell our products, and the approval of other major organizations, the Great Industrial Party could finally be considered to have fully matured. Tell the gnomes and dwarfs not to travel too far on personal aircrafts. There are gargoyles, griffins, and horned eagle knight. There are far too many powerful aerial forces in this world. Not only that, but they're also quite numerous and powerful. It'll be quite difficult to fight against them in a short period of time if we only rely on flying. It's better to focus on heavy aircrafts and cannons. That's right. All I could do was to use my status as someone who had experienced such things before to point them in the right direction so that they wouldn't have to invest a large amount of money into researching perpetual motion machines. Just 2 days ago, I had rejected the perpetual Olivia's magic box project. It would seem that no matter which civilization's researchers came from, they all had great ambitions and motivation for this seemingly wonderful perpetual energy source. Of course, I won't forbid any private research. After all, nobody knows what the future will be like. But I definitely won't allow any projects with A or higher priority to be affected. There were far too many research projects that needed to be done at the same time. I personally evaluated the priority of these projects. Iron Horse was only a C, while the civilian projects were at most a B, while the Envy Borealis's airship fleet was an S, the highest priority. Yep, the second-generation Olivia's magic box and the modification of the mobile armor were also at S. Yep, it was quite obvious that the projects with the highest priority were those that would be able to quickly become effective in actual combat. After all, we didn't have much time left. It could be expected that since the seeds of change had already been sown and the Industrial Revolution was unstoppable, no matter what happened in the future, as long as the mage country didn't suffer a total annihilation, the Great Industrial Party would definitely become an important member of the Truth Symposium. Magical engineering would also become an important academic field. Of course, since it was unstoppable, there was no need to care about it. There was no need to think too much about the future. I should focus on the present. Passive racial talent, unyielding ferocious beast. All abilities will increase according to the severity of your injuries. Once you're heavily injured, you'll receive battlefield intuition, defense combined with offense, and other talents. You'll be able to increase your overall combat strength by 3 times. Strength and agility will be increased by 2 times. Stamina will be increased by 3 times. System notification: don't be a mage anymore. Go be a barbarian instead. This ability wasn't a result of a stat breakthrough, nor was it that rare. Many powerful species would have this type of racial talent that would increase their combat strength the more heavily injured they were. This was especially true for barbarians and beast men. An injured beast would be far more dangerous. In fact, some berserkers would even choose to injure themselves before battle in order to increase their fighting spirit and power level. Although this was common, it didn't mean that it was useless. In fact, it was the most practical warrior talent. Anyone who used it would understand the joy of being able to counterattack in a desperate situation. However, those who were good at swimming would drown in water. If you relied too much on this talent, you would always be dancing on the edge of a cliff. You wouldn't even know how you died. You really did choose the wrong profession. Did you close your eyes and fill in your application? This was what Harlois had said to me when she learned that I had this talent. However, in a way, she wasn't wrong. After all, I was indeed a holy knight. In my second life, I had switched to magic in order to make up for my inadequacies, as well as to hide my true identity. However, the system's final blow to me was to directly open up a series of powerful melee job classes, including the Barbarian Berserker, Cross-Armored Knight, and Dragon Knight. Please prepare your own mount. Some of these job classes were truly attractive. If it wasn't for the fact that my bloodline required the power of order and chaos to be in balance, I would have really wanted to take on these job classes. In order to test out this new talent, I swept through the entire arena and unexpectedly discovered a few good candidates, which I recruited to be my subordinates. Of course, there was also a small accident. A barbarian mage. Me. Alright then, it was indeed rather shocking for me to defeat a heavily armored wild boar knight with my bare hands. However, after seeing my emblems of truth, he actually said that he wouldn't fight me unless I promised not to use magic. And so, I could only satisfy him. So, you crushed the enemy's iron helmet. Then, you threw his mount onto the arena? What a barbarian. Cough, that was just an accident. Now that the Great Industrial Party and Thorn Garden were on the right track, the Truth Symposium's decision arrived. It was time for me to leave.